The night Nariah Whitlock lost her husband, she did not lose him in a private argument. She did not lose him through a quiet confession, a late-night message, or a secret she found on his phone. She lost him in front of cameras. She lost him in front of billionaires. She lost him in front of the same society people who once smiled at her because she carried the Whitlock name. Inside the grand ballroom of Whitlock Crown Hotel, everything looked perfect from a distance. Crystal lights glittered above polished marble floors. Cameras flashed near the entrance. Famous investors shook hands beside tall glass tables. Women moved through the room in diamonds, satin, and designer gowns. Men in black suits spoke softly about deals worth more than most families would see in a lifetime. It was a charity auction, but everyone knew the real purpose: power, reputation, control. The Whitlock family never hosted an event without making sure the whole city remembered who owned the room. At the center of it all stood Dorian Whitlock, billionaire hotel magnate, respected businessman, and husband to the woman standing alone at the top of the staircase. Nariah had chosen a silver gown for the evening. Simple, graceful, nothing too loud. She had learned years ago that the Whitlock world respected beauty only when it stayed quiet. Her wedding ring caught the light as she held the railing, but Dorian did not look up to notice it. His attention belonged somewhere else. Celeste Arden stood beside him. She was not his wife. She was the woman people had started whispering about at dinners, board meetings, and private lounges. The woman Dorian called brilliant. The woman Odessa Whitlock welcomed too warmly. The woman whose name had begun entering Nariah's marriage before her body ever crossed their front door. Celeste wore white that night, soft and expensive, as if innocence had been tailored for her. Her smile was calm. Her posture was careful. She knew where every camera stood, and she knew when to lower her eyes so people would mistake calculation for modesty. Dorian leaned toward her, while a photographer called his name. For one small second, Nariah hoped he would step away. He did not. Instead, his hand moved to Celeste's lower back, not by accident, not with shame, not as a mistake he planned to correct. His touch rested there with comfort, with habit, with a tenderness he had not shown his wife in months. The room did not go silent at once. That would have been kinder. Instead, Nariah heard the small signs first: a sharp breath from a woman near the champagne table, a cough from one board member who suddenly looked down, a young assistant turning her face away too fast, a photographer pausing before lifting his camera again. They all saw it. They all understood it. Dorian Whitlock had placed his mistress in the space meant for his wife. Nariah did not move. She had survived enough cold dinners and locked conversations to know when love had left a room. She had seen Dorian answer Celeste's calls before hers. She had watched him defend Celeste's decisions with a patience he no longer gave his marriage. She had heard him call Nariah too sensitive, too emotional, too quick to feel hurt. But public shame carried a different weight. Private pain stays in the chest. Public pain stands beside you and asks everyone to stare. Dorian turned toward Celeste and smiled. That smile cut deeper than the touch. It was not the smile he gave reporters. It was not the polished grin he wore for investors. It was softer, more open, almost grateful. The kind of look Nariah used to receive when they were still new, when he still asked for her thoughts, when he still treated her silence as wisdom and not inconvenience. Celeste tilted her head and said something Nariah could not hear. Dorian laughed. The sound reached the staircase. Nariah felt her fingers tighten around the railing. She did not cry. She did not run. She did not create the scene many people expected from a wounded wife. She stood still, because some women learn how to bleed without making the world comfortable enough to call them dramatic. If you were Nariah, standing there while your husband smiled at another woman in public, what would you do? Would you walk away, confront him, or stay calm until the truth exposed everyone? Before this story goes deeper, subscribe to Love Tales with Mr. Easton, because this is not only a story about betrayal, it is a story about the night a woman was humiliated, blamed, abandoned, and forced to become stronger than the man who threw her away. Nariah had almost reached the bottom of the staircase when the second blow came. A reporter stepped forward from the left side of the ballroom, holding her phone like a weapon dressed as a question. "Mrs. Whitlock," she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the music. "Is it true that confidential design plans from Whitlock Crown were found under your personal account?" The string quartet kept playing for 2 more seconds before one violin fell out of rhythm. Dorian turned. Celeste went still. Naraya felt the air change before anyone spoke again. The reporter raised her voice. "Did you leak company secrets to damage your husband's business?" A flash went off. Another followed. Suddenly, cameras pointed at Naraya instead of the auction stage. For a moment, she could not process the words. Confidential design plans. Her personal account. Company secrets. Damage. Each phrase landed like a stone dropped into deep water. She had not leaked anything. She had not stolen anything. She had spent years protecting Dorian's work, often more carefully than he protected hers. She had reviewed proposals after midnight. She had corrected design flaws no one else saw. She had saved him from expensive mistakes and watched him take applause for ideas born at their kitchen table. Now the room looked at her as if she had been hiding a knife in her hand. A board member stepped away from her. That movement broke something inside Naraya, more than the reporter's question. One step, quiet, calculated, cowardly. The kind of step people take when they do not care whether you are innocent, only whether standing near you costs them something. Odessa Whitlock stood near the front row, her chin lifted, her expression cold. She did not look shocked. She looked annoyed, as if Naraya had stained the family name by being accused at an inconvenient time. Celeste lowered her gaze. For one brief second, the corner of her mouth lifted. It was small enough that most people missed it. Naraya did not. Dorian's eyes moved from the reporter to his wife. The entire ballroom seemed to wait for him. One sentence from him would have changed everything. He did not need proof in that moment. He did not need a full investigation. He only needed loyalty. He knew Naraya. He knew she had carried his ideas, protected his weaknesses, and stood beside him when other people only saw his money. He knew she would never destroy the company she had helped build. Naraya looked at him, waiting for the man she married to reach for her in the only way that mattered. "Defend me. Say you know me. Tell them I deserve the truth before the shame." Dorian opened his mouth. Celeste placed a hand on his arm. He looked at that hand. That was all Naraya needed to see. The music had stopped now. The cameras kept flashing. The ballroom watched a billionaire choose between his wife and his image. Dorian chose silence. And in that silence, Naraya understood something that no wedding vow had prepared her for. A partner who lets the world shame you without defense has already chosen something else over your heart. That night, the world called Naraya Whitlock disgraced, but they did not know the truth. They did not know the woman standing alone in that ballroom had helped build the very empire now rejecting her. They did not know her name would soon return to the same business world that mocked her. They did not know Dorian Whitlock had not discarded a weak wife. He had created his strongest competitor. Years before the ballroom went silent against Naraya, Dorian Whitlock first saw her in Boston. It was not at a party. It was not through family friends. It was not during one of those polished events where wealthy people pretended every smile meant friendship. He met her at a private property conference held inside a restored banking hall near the financial district. The room was full of developers, architects, investors, brokers, and consultants who spoke the language of money with perfect confidence. Every seat carried ambition. Every handshake carried a hidden request. Every presentation promised profit, prestige, and future expansion. Dorian was already a name people respected. He owned luxury hotels in New York, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles. His company, Whitlock Crown, had become a symbol of expensive taste. People stood straighter when he walked by. Men twice his age lowered their voices when he entered the room. Women watched him with curiosity, not only because he was rich, but because he carried loneliness like discipline. He had come to Boston to inspect a failing historic building near the harbor. The building had beauty, but no direction. Its old stone walls had survived storms, neglect, and careless owners. Most developers wanted to strip it down, polish the surface and turn it into another luxury property with no memory left inside it. Dorian listened as one consultant after another suggested glass walls, private lounges, imported marble, rooftop dining, and premium suites for wealthy guests. He took notes without interest. Across the table, Nerea Ashford sat quietly. She was not the loudest person there. She did not fight for attention. She wore a navy dress, a thin gold bracelet, and carried a worn leather notebook filled with sketches. Most people overlooked her because she worked for a smaller design firm and had no famous surname. Dorian noticed her because she was the only one in the room who looked at the building plans like they were alive. When the lead architect finished praising marble, glass, and polished metal, a senior investor asked if anyone had a final concern before they moved to budget projections. For a moment, no one spoke. Dorian was ready to close the folder. Nerea raised her hand. Her voice was calm when she began. "The proposal is beautiful, but it has no warmth." Several people turned toward her with polite impatience. One man smiled like he had already dismissed her. Dorian looked up. Nerea did not rush. She moved one page of the plan forward and pointed to the lobby. This entrance was once the first place immigrant workers came to settle accounts after long shifts at the docks. The stairwell was handmade. The lower hall still has original wood. If all of that gets covered with imported stone, the building loses the one thing no new hotel can buy. The architect frowned. "And what is that?" Nerea looked around the table. "Memory." The room shifted. She continued, softer now, but stronger with each word. "People do not remember marble. They remember where they felt safe. They remember the bench where their father waited, the light near the window, the smell of old wood, the room where someone welcomed them without asking what they owned." Dorian stopped writing. It was the first honest sentence he had heard all morning. Everyone else had spoken about how to make the building look expensive. Nerea spoke about how to make people feel something when they entered. She suggested keeping the original stairwell, opening the lower hall for public use, turning part of the ground floor into a local cafe, and letting the building carry both luxury and history without pretending one had to destroy the other. When she finished, the room stayed quiet. Not because they agreed at once, because she had changed the question. Dorian had arrived, asking how much the building could earn. Nerea made him ask what the building deserved to become. After the meeting, Dorian found her near the model display. Nerea stood with one hand resting on the edge of the table, studying the miniature building as if it had said something no one else heard. Dorian had watched powerful people spend hours trying to impress him. Nerea had done something different. She had ignored his importance completely. That interested him more than flattery. "You spoke like you knew the building," he said. Nerea turned to him. Her eyes held surprise, but not fear. "I read its history. Most people read a summary. I don't trust summaries with old places." That answer almost made him smile. Dorian moved closer to the model. "You think luxury needs history? I think luxury without feeling becomes decoration." He studied her then, not as a consultant, not as a woman invited to sit quietly near bigger names, but as someone with a mind he had not expected to meet in that room. "My hotels are called cold by critics," he said. Nerea did not deny it to please him. "I have read that. And you agree?" She looked back at the model. "I think your hotels are impressive. But impressive is not the same as loved." The truth should have offended him. Instead, it reached a place he rarely allowed anyone to touch. Dorian owned rooms across the country. Thousands of people slept in beds his company selected, walked across floors his money paid for, and sat under lights his designers approved. Yet, he had never thought about whether those spaces felt loved. He had built for admiration. Nerea spoke about belonging. That difference followed him for the rest of the day. At dinner with investors that evening, he barely listened. While men discussed projected revenue, he kept remembering the way Nerea touched the building model with care, as if old walls deserved respect. For the first time in years, Dorian wondered if his empire looked rich because it lacked a soul. Dorian asked for Nerea's number through the project office 2 days later. She did not respond at once. That unsettled him. Most people answered him quickly, sometimes too quickly. Nerea replied near midnight with one brief message, thanking him for asking about the Boston site and agreeing to meet for coffee the next afternoon. Their first conversation lasted 20 minutes longer than planned. The second lasted almost 2 hours. By the third, Dorian stopped pretending it was only about the project. They met after long meetings in quiet restaurants where no one bothered them. He would arrive in dark suits, carrying the weight of calls, contracts, and decisions. Naraya would arrive with her notebook, calm eyes, and questions that made him slow down. She asked him why he chose hotels. He said, "Because my father built the first one." She asked if he loved the work. He answered too quickly, "Of course." Naraya did not challenge him. She only waited. That silence made him honest. "I love winning," he admitted. "I don't know if that is the same thing." Naraya looked at him with no judgment. "It is not." Dorian should have disliked her directness. Instead, he began to crave it. She did not flatter the polished version of him. She spoke to the tired man beneath it. She noticed when his jaw tightened before hard calls. She noticed when he ordered black coffee because he had not slept. She noticed how he checked every exit in a room, as if rest had become unsafe. In return, he noticed small things about her. She folded napkins when thinking. She marked old buildings in city guidebooks. She smiled more with her eyes than her mouth. She never used pain to earn pity, but sometimes grief passed across her face when she spoke of her late father. Their closeness grew quietly. No grand public display, no reckless promises. Only two people learning how to be seen. One stormy evening in New York, Dorian invited Naraya to see an old hotel he had purchased near Madison Avenue. The building had been empty for years. Rain tapped against boarded windows. The lobby smelled of dust, old paper, and wet stone. Sheets covered forgotten furniture. A cracked mirror leaned behind the reception desk. The chandelier above them was wrapped in fabric, as if the room had closed its eyes and waited for someone to remember it. Dorian switched on a temporary work light. "This is the one my team wants demolished," he said. Naraya walked ahead slowly, her heels making soft sounds against the floor. She touched the carved railing near the stairs. Her hand paused there, gentle and thoughtful. Dorian watched her instead of the building. "What do you see?" he asked. Most people would have spoken about cost, repairs, risk, market value. Naraya stood in the center of the lobby and looked up at the covered chandelier. "A second chance," she said. The answer moved through him with unexpected force. "For the hotel?" he asked. "For anything that still has a foundation." Dorian stepped closer. Rain pressed against the windows. The city outside sounded distant. In that dim lobby, with dust around them and broken beauty above them, he saw a version of himself he had buried under ambition. A man who wanted to be more than powerful. A man who wanted to be understood. Naraya turned toward him. "You don't have to erase everything old to make something valuable." He knew she was speaking about the building. He also felt she had somehow found him in the sentence. Dorian reached for her hand first. He did it slowly, giving her room to refuse. She did not pull away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The first kiss was not rushed. It was careful, warm, and full of the kind of respect Dorian did not know he had been missing. That night, the empty hotel no longer felt abandoned. It felt like the beginning of a home. 6 months later, Dorian proposed. He did not do it in front of cameras. He did not invite reporters. He did not turn it into a business event for the Whitlock name. For once, he chose privacy over performance. He brought Naraya back to the restored Boston building, where they first worked together. The lower hall had been preserved. The handmade stairwell remained. The old wood had been cleaned, not replaced. Warm lamps glowed near the windows. A small cafe had opened near the entrance, and local workers filled the tables with conversation. Naraya stood near the stairwell, taking in every detail. "You kept it," she said. Dorian stood beside her. "You were right." She glanced at him with a smile. "I like hearing that." "I know." For a while, they watched people move through the space. A young mother helped her child climb onto a bench. An elderly man ran his hand along the restored wall. 2 workers laughed near the cafe counter. The building felt alive because Naraya had refused to let Dorian strip away its heart. He took her hand. "I used to think success meant owning beautiful places," he said. "You taught me that a beautiful place means nothing if no one feels safe inside it. Naraya looked at him, her expression softening. Dorian lowered to one knee. Her breath caught. "I don't want a wife who stands behind me," he said. "I want a woman beside me. I want your mind, your truth, your stubborn honesty, and your heart, if you trust me with it." For one clear moment, Naraya believed every word. She believed he saw her. She believed he valued more than her beauty. She believed the man kneeling before her would protect her name in any room, against anyone, at any cost. When she said yes, Dorian held her like he had been given something rare, and Naraya, with tears in her eyes, thought she had found a love strong enough to honor both her heart and her voice. After Naraya became Mrs. Whitlock, the world treated her wedding like a victory. Magazines called her graceful. Society pages called her fortunate. Strangers looked at her ring and believed she had stepped into a life where nothing could touch her. To them, marrying Dorian Whitlock meant safety, wealth, status, and a permanent seat beside power. For a while, Naraya believed it too. Their first months carried a softness she held close. Dorian still called during the day. He still asked what she thought about hotel layouts, brand choices, old buildings, and client expectations. He still came home tired, yet willing to sit with her at the kitchen island, while she spread design notes across the marble counter. Sometimes he would loosen his tie, lean over her shoulder, and ask, "What am I missing?" Naraya loved that question. It made her feel trusted. It made her feel needed. It made her feel like their marriage had space for both his ambition and her mind. Slowly, that question began to disappear. Dorian started taking earlier flights and later calls. His phone stayed face down at dinner. His answers grew shorter. Their home, once filled with late-night conversations and quiet laughter, became a beautiful place where silence sat between them like another guest. Naraya told herself it was pressure. She told herself his empire required sacrifice. She told herself every marriage entered seasons where love had to bend around work. So she adjusted. She spoke less when he looked tired. She waited longer before asking for time. She stopped mentioning how often he missed dinner. She smiled for cameras, stood beside him at openings, and learned to read his mood before she reached for his hand. She did not know it yet, but the first stage of becoming invisible is learning to make your pain convenient for everyone else. Odessa Whitlock noticed Naraya's efforts and rewarded none of them. Dorian's mother had the kind of elegance people mistook for kindness until they stood close enough to feel the cold. Odessa never raised her voice. She never needed to. Her power lived in pauses, lifted brows, and sentences shaped to wound without leaving marks. From the beginning, she treated Naraya like a guest who had stayed too long. At family dinners, Odessa would praise Naraya's dress before reminding everyone that Whitlock wives were expected to carry themselves with quiet discipline. If Naraya offered an opinion about a new property, Odessa would smile thinly and say, "How thoughtful. Dorian has experts for that." The first time it happened, Naraya laughed softly, thinking she had misunderstood. The second time, she went silent. The third time, she noticed Dorian heard it and chose not to correct his mother. That hurt more than Odessa's words. Odessa believed Naraya had married above her place. She never said it directly, but every conversation carried the message. Naraya's father had not owned towers. Her family name did not open private clubs. She understood design, restoration, and human comfort. Yet Odessa cared more about bloodlines than brilliance. When guests came to the penthouse, Odessa introduced Naraya as Dorian's lovely wife, never as the woman whose ideas had shaped half of Whitlock Crown's strongest projects. When charity committees needed a face, Naraya was invited. When company discussions began, she was expected to leave the room with grace. One evening, Naraya entered the dining room and heard Odessa speaking to Dorian near the fireplace. "She must learn the difference between influence and authority," Odessa said. Naraya stopped outside the doorway. Dorian did not answer. Again, his silence did the damage. From that night forward, Naraya understood that in the Whitlock family, acceptance came with conditions. She could be admired. She could be displayed. She could never be treated as equal. The boardroom made that truth sharper. Naraya did not attend every Whitlock Crown meeting, but Dorian often asked her to review proposals at home. She saw errors quickly. She knew when a building plan looked expensive, without serving the people meant to use it. She understood why certain lobbies felt cold, why certain suites failed to invite comfort, and why guests remembered smaller details more than grand displays. At home, Dorian listened. In the boardroom, her name vanished. Once, Whitlock Crown prepared a major redesign for a landmark hotel in Seattle. The first plan centered on private luxury, hard surfaces, and dramatic lighting. Naraya studied the renderings at midnight, while Dorian poured coffee beside her. "This lobby will photograph well," she said, "but people will not stay in it." Dorian looked over. "Why?" "Because every chair faces away from warmth. The fireplace is treated like decoration, the old windows are hidden. You are designing a room people pass through, not a room they return to." She sketched a new seating flow. She suggested local art, softer gathering spaces, restored wood, and a public lounge that felt welcoming without lowering the brand. Dorian took the sketch. 2 days later, the board praised him for a more human direction. Naraya sat at the far end of the room as an invited spouse. No one asked her to speak. No one knew the sketch was hers. A senior board member said, "Dorian, this is why your instincts remain unmatched." Dorian smiled and accepted the praise. Naraya lowered her eyes to her hands. That moment taught her how erasure often happens. It does not always arrive as cruelty. Sometimes it arrives as applause given to the wrong person, while the right person sits close enough to hear it. After the meeting, Dorian kissed her forehead and said, "They loved the idea." Naraya waited for more. Nothing came. He did not say, "Your idea." He did not say, "I should have credited you." He simply walked ahead, already speaking into his phone. The pattern became familiar. Dorian brought problems home, and Naraya solved them. He asked for her eye, her judgment, her sense of warmth, her ability to spot what wealthy designers missed. She gave him all of it because she believed helping him meant strengthening their life together. He would spread papers across their dining table and say a project lacked feeling. Naraya would study the plans until midnight. He would mention a client disliked a hotel concept. Naraya would review the client's history and explain what the team had missed. He would say a property looked perfect, yet guests were not returning. Naraya would walk through the space and point out the cold lighting, stiff furniture, and lifeless public areas. Her ideas moved through Whitlock Crown like quiet water. The company improved. The press praised Dorian's new emotional intelligence. Investors admired his unexpected sensitivity to guest experience. Design magazines called his recent projects warmer, more grounded, more memorable. Naraya read those articles alone. She wanted to be proud of him. In many ways, marriage had taught her to celebrate shared wins, and part of her still believed his success was their success. Yet something inside her began to ache each time the world praised him for the exact things he had taken from their private conversations. One night, she asked him gently, "Would it be so difficult to mention that I helped?" Dorian looked up from his laptop. "You know I value you. I know what you say here," she replied. "I am asking why it never reaches the room where it matters." His expression tightened. "Business is complicated, Naraya." "No," she said softly. "Respect is not complicated." Dorian closed his laptop. The conversation ended without resolution. That was the first time Naraya realized love spoken in private loses power when it turns silent in public. Still, Naraya kept helping, not because she lacked pride, not because she failed to see what was happening. She kept helping because she had built her idea of marriage around partnership. To her, love meant standing close enough to carry weight together. It meant seeing a weakness and covering it with care, not using it as a weapon. It meant giving without keeping score, as long as both hearts stayed honest. Naraya had watched her parents live that kind of love. Her father had restored old houses with his hands, and her mother had kept the books at their small office. When money was short, they sat together at the kitchen table and solved it as one unit. When clients praised her father, he always said, "My wife kept this place standing before I touched a single wall." That was the kind of loyalty Naraya understood. So when Dorian asked for help, she gave it from that place. She did not need her name on every project. She did not need cameras pointed at her. She did not want to compete with her husband inside their home. She only wanted him to remember that her mind mattered, even when no one else watched. Some nights, Dorian came home exhausted and sat beside her without speaking. Naraya would place a cup of tea near him, read through his notes, and mark sections he needed to revisit. He would lean back, close his eyes and whisper, "I don't know what I would do without you." Those words should have comforted her. Instead, over time, they began to feel unfinished, because he knew what he would do without her. He would still walk into boardrooms and take the praise. He would still stand before cameras and be called brilliant. He would still let the world believe he built alone. Naraya kept telling herself that love did not need applause, but deep inside, she was beginning to understand that partnership without recognition turns devotion into unpaid labor of the heart. As months passed, Dorian became harder to reach. His body came home, but his attention stayed somewhere else. Dinner grew colder before he arrived. Messages sat unanswered. Weekend plans collapsed under emergency calls. When Naraya walked into his study, he looked up like she had interrupted a meeting, even when the room held only the two of them. At first, she tried to bring him back gently. She planned quiet meals. She suggested short trips. She asked him to walk with her in the evening, the way they used to do when their love felt simple. Dorian always had a reason to postpone. A deal needed closing. A board member needed calming. A hotel opening needed his presence. A call from Europe could not wait. Naraya began sleeping on her side of the bed, while his stayed untouched until dawn. When he finally entered the room, he moved carefully, not with tenderness, but with the skill of a man trying not to wake a conversation he did not want to have. One night, she waited for him in the living room. The city lights glowed beyond the windows. Her dinner plate sat untouched. His had been cleared away after hours of waiting. When he entered, he looked surprised to see her awake. "You should have slept," he said. "I wanted to see you. I am here." Naraya studied his face. Handsome, tired, distant, still her husband, yet no longer truly beside her. "No," she said, her voice low. "You come home. That is not the same as being here." Dorian rubbed his temple. "I cannot do this tonight." The words landed quietly, but they stayed. He walked past her toward the bedroom. Naraya remained in the living room, surrounded by wealth, silence, and a marriage that looked perfect to everyone except the woman disappearing inside it. Celeste Arden arrived at Whitlock Crown during a season when the company wanted more than profit. Dorian's hotels were earning well, but the board wanted a new public image. They wanted the brand to feel warmer, younger, and more connected to culture. The numbers looked strong, yet online reviews kept repeating the same complaint. Guests respected the hotels, but few felt attached to them. That problem should have led Dorian back to Naraya. For years, she had warned him that people did not return to a place only because it looked expensive. They returned because the place made them feel seen. But by that time, Dorian had grown used to taking Naraya's wisdom at home and leaving her name outside the office door. So the company hired a brand strategist. Celeste entered the headquarters on a Monday morning, wearing a pale cream suit, pearl earrings, and a smile that seemed trained for glass walls and boardroom cameras. She carried a slim black folder, greeted assistants by name, and moved through the lobby as if she had already studied the building before stepping into it. She was not loud. She did not need to be. Celeste understood that quiet confidence worked better around rich men than obvious ambition. She shook Dorian's hand with both warmth and restraint, holding his gaze for a second longer than business required, but not long enough to seem improper. "I have followed your work for years," she told him. "Whitlock Crown has discipline. What it needs now is emotional command." The phrase pleased him, not because it was new, because it made his weakness sound like strategy. Naraya heard about Celeste that evening, not from Dorian's excitement, but from his tone. He mentioned her as if she were useful, sharp, and refreshing. Naraya listened carefully. Something in the way he said Celeste's name made the room feel smaller. Celeste's charm worked because it never looked hungry at first. She did not rush toward Dorian with open admiration. She built it slowly. In meetings, she praised his discipline before giving advice. At dinners, she asked careful questions about his father's legacy. During presentations, she credited his instincts before presenting her own suggestions. She knew how to make a powerful man feel studied without making him feel challenged. That was her gift. She made admiration feel intelligent. Around the board, Celeste carried herself with perfect grace. She laughed softly at the right moments. She remembered names. She sent handwritten thank you notes after major meetings. She wore colors that photographed well beside Dorian's dark suits. She spoke about brand identity, legacy, trust, and public affection with the ease of someone who knew how emotions influenced money. Dorian responded to it. He began inviting her into rooms where only senior executives had sat before. He asked for her opinion before press events. He listened when she said his interviews felt too controlled. He smiled when she told him the public needed to see more of the man, not only the empire. Celeste never said, "Naraya does that already." She never said, "Your wife understands warmth better than I do." She never said, "The voice your brand needs has been living in your home." Instead, she stepped into the gap Dorian had created. When Naraya first met her at a company dinner, Celeste rose from her seat with a polished smile. "Mrs. Whitlock," she said, "I have heard so much about you." Naraya returned the greeting with grace. Dorian looked pleased, as if the two women standing in the same room proved there was no danger. But Naraya noticed how Celeste's eyes moved. First to her face, next to her ring, last to Dorian. That was when Naraya understood Celeste did not enter rooms by accident. She measured them. Celeste learned Dorian quickly. She noticed he disliked correction in public. She noticed praise softened him faster than reason. She noticed his pride rose whenever someone spoke of his father's name, his discipline, or his control. Most of all, she noticed that he wanted to be admired without being asked to change. Naraya loved him by telling him the truth. Celeste approached him by making the truth feel unnecessary. In one planning session, Dorian rejected a softer campaign idea from the communications team. The room went tense. No one wanted to push back. Celeste waited until everyone else had gone quiet. "I understand why you dislike it," she said. "You built this company with strength. You don't need softness. You need emotion that still feels powerful." Dorian leaned back, interested. Celeste continued, "The public should feel warmth, but they should never forget control. That balance is rare. It fits you." The same advice, presented as praise, reached him in a way Naraya's honest words no longer did. Celeste remembered that, from that day, she framed every correction as proof of Dorian's brilliance. If a plan failed, the problem was never his decision. It was the team failing to translate his vision. If the press called a property cold, it meant the public had not yet understood his standard. If Naraya questioned a direction, Celeste would gently suggest that wives often saw the personal side, while executives had to think at scale. She never insulted Naraya openly. She did something more effective. She made Naraya sound small, a wife with feelings, a woman with opinions, a person who cared about comfort while Dorian carried an empire. Dorian began to accept that framing because it protected him from the harder truth. Naraya asked him to grow. Celeste taught him how to feel right without doing the work. That was the moment danger entered the marriage-wearing manners. Celeste's campaign against Naraya did not begin with a public attack. It began with concern. At first, she spoke gently. "I hope Naraya is handling all of this attention well," she said one afternoon after a difficult press review. "The Whitlock world asks a lot from anyone." Dorian barely looked up. "She is stronger than people think." "Of course," Celeste replied. "I only mean that strength can look different in private." The comment stayed in the air. A week later, after Naraya questioned the direction of a luxury resort proposal, Celeste waited until the meeting ended before speaking to Dorian alone. "She cares about you," Celeste said, "but sometimes love makes people protective in a way that limits growth." Dorian frowned. "Naraya understands design." "She does," Celeste said, "but she may not understand what it means to carry the pressure you carry." That sentence reached the exact place Dorian wanted soothed. Pressure, responsibility, the burden of being the man everyone depended on. Celeste did not need to say Naraya was difficult. She only needed to make Dorian feel misunderstood by his own wife. From there, his pride did the rest. Soon, Naraya's honest questions became stress. Her hurt became sensitivity. Her desire for recognition became pressure. Her warnings became fear. Her silence became mood. Dorian started repeating those words without noticing where they came from. One evening, Naraya told him the new campaign felt too polished and lacked the human feeling guests needed. Dorian sighed. "You always think something is missing." Naraya stared at him. "I am trying to help." "I know," he said, but his voice held no patience. But help does not always need to sound like criticism. The line did not belong to him. Naraya knew it. Celeste had not raised her voice inside the marriage. She had placed new words in Dorian's mouth. Soon, Dorian defended Celeste before Naraya even finished speaking. If Naraya questioned why Celeste attended private strategy dinners, Dorian called it business. If Naraya asked why Celeste texted late, he called it urgency. If Naraya said Celeste seemed too comfortable crossing boundaries, he accused her of reading too much into ordinary work. "She is doing her job," he said one night. "So am I," Naraya replied. Dorian looked up from his phone. "What does that mean?" "It means I am your wife. I am telling you something feels wrong." He locked the screen. Celeste is not the problem. Naraya's chest tightened. "I never said she was the only problem." His face hardened. "I am too tired for this." That became his escape. Tired, busy, under pressure, needed elsewhere. Celeste's name began to receive more protection than Naraya's heart. Dorian gave patience to the woman flattering his power and irritation to the woman asking for truth. He accepted Celeste's late-night calls, but treated Naraya's questions like interruptions. He praised Celeste's insight in front of executives, but treated Naraya's instincts as emotional reactions. The shift did not happen in one dramatic break. It happened through small daily choices: a defended text, a private lunch, a meeting extended past dinner, a smile that lasted too long, a wife waiting at home, while another woman received the version of him that still knew how to listen. Naraya tried to speak with dignity. She did not scream. She did not chase Celeste through office halls. She refused to give society the pleasure of calling her unstable. But each time Dorian chose defensiveness over honesty, something in her stepped backward. Love does not disappear only when someone leaves. Sometimes it weakens while both people remain in the same house, using the same last name, sleeping under the same roof, and pretending the silence has no meaning. Naraya noticed the changes because marriage teaches a woman the rhythm of the man she loves. She noticed when Dorian stopped leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. She noticed when his laptop password changed after years of staying the same. She noticed when he took calls on the balcony with the door closed, even in cold weather. She noticed how he lowered his voice when Celeste's name lit up the screen. At first, she questioned herself. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she had become too sensitive after months of feeling pushed aside. Maybe she wanted proof because pain needed a shape. But the signs kept coming. Dorian's shirts carried a trace of unfamiliar perfume after late meetings. His calendar listed brand review 3 nights in 1 week. His driver stopped mentioning who rode with him. His assistant, once friendly with Naraya, began answering questions with careful politeness. The distance in the marriage became harder to deny. One night, Naraya entered his study and found him smiling at a message. Not the formal smile he used for clients, a private one. A soft one. When he saw her, he placed the phone face down. That small movement told her more than any confession. Who was that? She asked. Work. Work has a name. Dorian's jaw tightened. Do not start. The words stung because she had not started anything. She had only entered the room where her husband had already begun leaving her. Viewers, let me ask you this. Does emotional betrayal hurt deeper than public betrayal? Because sometimes the heart breaks long before the world sees the damage. Comment your thoughts below, like this video, and subscribe to Love Tales with Mr. Easton for more stories about love, loyalty, and the painful truth people learn too late. That night, Naraya walked back to their bedroom alone. Dorian stayed in the study. His phone lit up again. He did not turn it over. The charity auction no longer felt like a celebration. A few minutes earlier, guests had been laughing beneath crystal lights, raising glasses, and discussing donations as if kindness were another way to display status. The Whitlock Crown Hotel had never looked more polished. Every table carried white roses. Every waiter moved with trained calm. Every guest understood that one wrong look could travel through society before the night ended. Naraya knew those rules. She had lived inside them long enough to understand that rich rooms rarely forgave public weakness. They smiled at you while you were useful. They praised you while your name still opened doors. But once suspicion touched you, even old friends forgot how close they once stood. That night, suspicion found her in front of everyone. The reporter's voice cut through the room again, sharper this time, as if she knew the damage had already begun. Mrs. Whitlock, will you deny that your account was linked to the leaked design files? Naraya stood near the foot of the staircase, her hand still resting lightly on the railing. Her face remained composed, but her mind raced through every private file, every old login, every proposal she had reviewed for Dorian. Nothing made sense. She looked across the ballroom. Dorian stood beside Celeste, still close enough for the cameras to catch them in one frame. His face had lost color, but he did not move toward Naraya. That was the moment fear entered her chest. Not fear of the accusation, fear of being left alone with it. The question moved through the ballroom, faster than any official announcement. Guests, who had leaned toward auction catalogs, now leaned toward one another. A woman near the front covered her mouth, not from sympathy, but from the thrill of having something dangerous to repeat later. Two investors stopped mid-conversation. A camera operator shifted position to get a cleaner angle of Naraya's face. The music faded. The auction host stood frozen near the stage, holding a card no one cared about anymore. Someone whispered, "Company secrets." Another voice answered, "From her own account?" A third person said, "That would destroy the Whitlock deal in Chicago." Naraya heard pieces, not full sentences. That made it worse. Rumor did not need complete truth. It only needed enough fragments to sound believable. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. How could she defend herself against an accusation she had never seen? How could she explain files she had not touched? How could she convince a room already feeding on the idea that the quiet wife had struck back at the husband who humiliated her? The reporter pushed closer. "Were you trying to damage Mr. Whitlock after reports of marital tension?" That question changed the room. Now it was no longer only business. It had become a story people wanted to believe. A wounded wife, a powerful husband, a company scandal, a woman accused of revenge. Naraya straightened. "I have not leaked anything," she said. Her voice was clear, but truth sounded small in a room already choosing drama. Celeste lowered her eyes at the perfect moment. To anyone watching from a distance, she looked unsettled, almost sorry for Naraya. Her shoulders dipped slightly. Her lips pressed together as if she were holding back concern. She played innocence with the discipline of a woman who understood that stillness could speak louder than words. Naraya saw more. She saw Celeste's hand remain on Dorian's arm, not clinging but claiming. She saw how Celeste did not look surprised by the reporter's question. She saw the tiny curve at the corner of her mouth before Celeste hid it under a softer expression. It lasted less than a second, but Naraya caught it. A cold understanding moved through her. Celeste had not only been waiting for this moment, she had been ready for it. The thought made Naraya's skin tighten. Dorian turned slightly toward Celeste, as if checking whether she was all right. That small movement was almost unbearable. His wife stood accused before the entire room, yet his first instinct still drifted toward the woman beside him. Celeste gave him a faint shake of the head, the kind meant to look noble. "Do not make this worse. Do not defend too soon. Do not risk your company for her." She did not need to say any of it aloud. Dorian read her face and stayed where he stood. Naraya felt the truth with painful clarity. Celeste knew how to guide a room without touching a microphone. She knew how to make herself appear gentle while letting another woman carry shame. The cameras kept flashing. Celeste kept her eyes lowered. And Naraya understood that innocence could be performed by the guilty when the audience wanted a show. One by one, Dorian's board members created distance. It was not dramatic. That would have required courage. Their betrayal came through small movements. A step backward, a turned shoulder, a glance toward the exits, a hand lowered from a greeting before it could become support. These were people who had accepted Naraya's hospitality for years. They had eaten at her table. They had praised the warmth of the homes she helped design. They had asked her quiet advice when projects felt lifeless. Some had even pulled her aside after meetings to say Dorian was lucky to have her eye. Now they looked at her like closeness carried a cost. Harlan Pierce, one of Whitlock Crown's oldest board members, adjusted his cufflinks and moved beside another executive. He did not meet Naraya's eyes. Victoria Kells, who had once told Naraya that her redesign suggestion saved a hotel lobby, suddenly began speaking to a donor as if nothing unusual had happened. Their loyalty belonged to the empire, not to truth, not to fairness, not to the woman they knew. Naraya searched their faces and found calculation everywhere. If they defended her and she was later blamed, they would look careless. If they stayed away, they remained safe. In their world, safety mattered more than character. Dorian saw them move. Naraya knew he saw. That was why she looked at him again. She was not asking him to fight the whole room. She was asking him to refuse the easy cowardice everyone else had chosen. One sentence would have been enough. My wife deserves the truth before judgment. But Dorian stayed still. His board protected themselves. His mother protected the family name. Celeste protected her place. And Naraya stood in the center of a room where no one protected her. By morning, Dorian's silence became policy. The official statement from Whitlock Crown did not defend Naraya. It did not call the accusation false. It did not mention her years of private contribution or her loyalty to the company. It spoke of internal review, responsible leadership, shareholder trust, and the need to protect confidential materials. Every word sounded careful. Every word abandoned her. Dorian approved the statement before sunrise. Naraya read it alone, in the bedroom they had once shared like a promise. Her hands did not shake. That surprised her. Some pain enters so deep that the body becomes still around it. A few hours later, Odessa arrived at the penthouse dressed as if she were going to a board luncheon. This family cannot survive sentiment right now, she said. Naraya looked at her. I am not sentiment. I am his wife. Odessa's eyes narrowed. That is exactly why this must be handled cleanly. Handled as if Naraya were a broken vase. As if her name, her work, her heart, and her marriage were all objects to be packed away before guests arrived. Dorian did not come home until evening. When he entered, he looked older but not brave. The board is concerned, he said. Naraya waited. He removed his watch and placed it on the dresser. My lawyers think a separation is best until the review is complete. For a moment, the room held no sound. Naraya looked at the man who once promised to stand beside her in every room. You are separating from me to protect the company, she said. Dorian looked away. That was his answer. By noon, Naraya Whitlock's name belonged to strangers. Business blogs carried her photo beside headlines written to wound. Social pages called her jealous. Gossip accounts called her desperate. Anonymous commenters claimed they had always sensed something strange about her quiet nature. People who had never met her spoke with confidence about her marriage, her motives, and her mind. Every article used the same pattern. Dorian was the betrayed billionaire. Whitlock Crown was the endangered empire. Celeste was the calm woman standing near him during a crisis. Naraya was the disgraced wife. The word followed her everywhere. Disgraced at the auction, disgraced in the marriage, disgraced in society, disgraced wife, linked to leaked files. No one asked who benefited from the leak. No one asked why the accusation arrived in a room full of cameras. No one asked why Dorian's mistress looked ready for a scandal before the wife even understood the charge. They only asked how far Naraya had fallen. She stopped answering calls after the third journalist pretended to offer fairness while hunting for a confession. She closed her laptop after seeing a photo of Dorian leaving headquarters with Celeste walking a few steps behind him, her face soft for the cameras. The caption read, Whitlock leans on trusted strategist amid family crisis. Family crisis. Naraya almost laughed. She had been turned into the crisis so everyone else could remain clean. That evening, she removed her wedding ring and placed it on the bathroom counter. She did not throw it. She did not scream. She stood there, breathing through the kind of hurt that changes a person. The world thought it had ended her, but the world had only taught her who could not be trusted with her name. For 3 months, the world believed Nariah Whitlock had disappeared because shame had finally swallowed her. No one saw her at private dinners. No one saw her at charity luncheons. No one saw her stepping out of black cars outside luxury buildings with cameras waiting near the curb. Her name stopped appearing beside Dorian's in-event programs. Her face vanished from glossy society pages, except when bloggers used old photos to remind their readers how far she had fallen. People made a story out of her absence. They said she was hiding. They said she had lost the strength to face the city. They said Dorian's separation had broken her pride. Some claimed she had gone to Europe. Others said she was living quietly in one of the Whitlock country homes, surrounded by lawyers and regret. A gossip column even wrote that Nariah had retreated from public life after failing to repair her marriage. Nariah read none of it after the first week. At first, silence hurt. It felt like the world had taken her voice and rewritten her life with cruel hands. Every headline treated her as guilty. Every social post turned her pain into entertainment. The more she stayed quiet, the more people felt free to decide what her silence meant. They mistook her refusal to explain for weakness. They mistook her calm for defeat. They mistook her absence for surrender. Nariah was not hiding from shame. She was protecting her energy. She had learned something in the harshest way. When people want a scandal, truth has to fight through noise. So she stopped giving the noise access to her heart. She changed her number. She stopped checking comments. She let the city talk until its hunger turned toward another target. While they buried her name in rumors, Nariah began planning the life they thought she no longer had the courage to build. Celeste Arden used those 3 months well. She moved closer to Dorian in public, not with the boldness of a woman claiming victory, but with the softness of someone pretending she had been forced into importance. She appeared at his side during business dinners, investor briefings, and charity meetings where Nariah's seat once carried quiet dignity. Celeste understood timing. She never acted too pleased. She never smiled too wide when cameras turned toward her. She wore gentle colors, lowered her voice during interviews, and spoke about supporting stability during a painful season. Each phrase made her sound loyal. Each appearance placed her nearer to the role she had wanted from the beginning. To the public, she became the calm presence beside a wounded billionaire. To Nariah, from the few photos she accidentally saw, Celeste became proof that some people do not need to win cleanly. They only need others to look away long enough. Dorian did not correct the image. That was another cut. He allowed Celeste to stand close enough for people to ask questions. He allowed headlines to frame her as trusted. He allowed the same woman who had crossed his marriage line to appear like the one holding his life together. At a business awards dinner, Celeste walked beside him in a pale blue gown, one hand resting lightly around his arm. When reporters asked how Whitlock Crown was coping with the scandal, she smiled with practiced sadness. Dorian is focused on protecting the people who depend on him, she said. Not his wife, not the truth, the people. That word made him look noble, and made Nariah look like the problem he had survived. Celeste knew exactly how to stand beside power without appearing to chase it. And Dorian, proud enough to need comfort and weak enough to accept it from the wrong woman, let her stay there. Odessa Whitlock also helped shape the story. At private lunches, garden receptions, and quiet rooms where old money traded opinions with soft voices, Odessa spoke of Nariah like a mistake the family had endured with patience. She never sounded cruel. That was her skill. She sounded disappointed. She has chosen privacy, Odessa told one committee chair, lifting her teacup with steady fingers. Perhaps that is best for everyone. To another woman she said, Nariah never fully adjusted to the pressure attached to this family. At a museum fundraiser, when someone asked if there had been any progress with the investigation, Odessa sighed and looked away. Some people are not prepared for the weight of a name like Whitlock. The sentence traveled. By the next week, society had turned Odessa's suggestion into fact. Nariah had been fragile. Nariah had been jealous. Nariah had reached beyond her place. Now she had accepted where she truly belonged, outside the circle she once entered through marriage. Odessa liked that version because it protected Dorian. It also protected herself. If Nariah had been wronged, Odessa had failed another woman. If Nariah had been framed, The family had cast out an innocent person. If Naraya had built value inside Whitlock Crown, then Odessa had spent years belittling the very mind that helped strengthen her son's company. So Odessa chose a cleaner lie. Naraya had overstepped. Naraya had fallen. Naraya had finally accepted her place. What Odessa did not know was that Naraya had stopped asking for a place in their world. She no longer wanted their table, their false approval, or their cold version of belonging. For the first time since marrying Dorian, Naraya was building without waiting for the Whitlock family to make room, and that freedom was worth more than any seat Odessa had ever offered. The truth lived in a small office above an old furniture showroom in Chicago. The building sat on a busy street where delivery trucks rattled past before sunrise and shop owners swept the sidewalks with tired hands. The entrance door stuck in cold weather. The stairs complained under every step. The hallway smelled of sawdust, coffee, and old paint. A heater groaned near the back wall, giving more sound than warmth. It was nothing like Whitlock Crown. No marble floors, no private elevator, no assistants waiting with polished smiles, no flowers replaced before they wilted. Naraya loved it anyway. The first time she unlocked the office, she stood in the center of the room and took in everything that needed work. Cracked windows, uneven floorboards, water stains near the ceiling, a narrow desk left by the previous tenant, 2 chairs that did not match, dust gathered in corners no one had touched in months. To most people, it looked like failure. To Naraya, it looked honest. No one had chosen it for her. No one had allowed her to use it as a favor. No family name had opened the door. She had signed the lease with her own hand, using money she had protected before the separation and savings. Most people assumed she had no right to manage. On the first morning, she brought in a box of samples, a kettle, 3 notebooks, and a framed photo of her father standing outside a restored brick house years earlier. She placed the photo on the desk. "Start small," she whispered, as if speaking to him. Outside, the city moved without caring who she used to be. Inside, Naraya began again, not as Mrs. Whitlock, not as a disgraced wife, but as a woman who had survived being erased and still remembered how to design a future. She named the company Ashford Living. Ashford was her late father's family name, the one she had placed behind Whitlock when she married Dorian. For years, people had treated the Whitlock name as an upgrade, as if her old identity were something simple to outgrow. Naraya had once allowed that assumption to pass without argument. Now she reached back for the name that had loved her first. Her father, Alden Ashford, had never been rich. He restored small houses, closed storefronts, and aging community buildings with hands rough from work and a heart steady enough to see value where other men saw waste. He taught Naraya that every room had a purpose, even forgotten ones. When she was a girl, he took her through empty houses before renovation began. He would ask, "What does this place need?" Naraya once answered, "New paint." Her father smiled. "Paint helps the eyes. What helps the people?" That question shaped her. Ashford Living would not chase only the wealthy. Naraya wanted old buildings turned into useful spaces for families, small businesses, local groups, and communities tired of being priced out of beauty. She wanted restored walls, warm rooms, safer housing, local shops, honest design, and places where ordinary people felt respected. Her first proposal was not grand. It focused on a neglected row of mixed-use buildings near a working-class neighborhood. The budget was tight. The margins were modest. The project had none of the glamour Dorian's company loved. That was the point. Naraya was no longer designing to impress rooms full of powerful people. She was designing for the people those rooms often ignored. She wrote the company mission on a whiteboard with a fading marker: beauty with purpose, trust before profit, people before image. For the first time in months, her name did not feel stolen. It felt returned. Ashford Living began with 5 people and more courage than certainty. Orlan Voss came first. He was a retired contractor with broad shoulders, silver hair, and a voice roughened by decades on construction sites. He had worked with Naraya years earlier and trusted her eye more than any famous architect he knew. "You see the problem before the wall comes down," he told her. Priya Knoll joined next. She was a sharp legal advisor with clear eyes and a calm way of speaking that made panic feel useless. Priya handled the quiet fight to clear Naraya's name, reviewing old accounts, access logs, contracts, and every weak point in the scandal story. Talia Fern arrived with a portfolio under one arm and nervous hope in her smile. She was young, talented, and tired of design firms that treated fresh ideas like threats. Naraya hired her after one interview. Reeves Calder became the accountant because someone had to speak hard truth about money. He warned Naraya when invoices stretched thin, when savings dropped too low, and when hope needed a budget before it became a risk. Together, they worked long days in the cold office. They shared cheap coffee, fixed the printer with tape, and used sample boards as dining tables when deadlines ran late. Later, Brennan Vale appeared during a rainy afternoon, dressed too well for the building and too patient to be dismissed quickly. He came as an investor, but not with pity. He had studied Whitlock Crown's past projects and knew Naraya's work had been hiding in plain sight. Naraya did not trust him at first. She had learned the price of trusting powerful men too easily. Still, when Brennan asked what Ashford Living stood for, she answered with the truth. Proof. Proof that silence was not surrender. Proof that losing a title did not mean losing worth. Proof that the woman they called Disgraced had only stepped away long enough to become undeniable. The rain had been falling over Chicago since morning. By afternoon, the windows in Naraya's small office were blurred with water, and the old heater near the wall made a tired sound without giving enough warmth. Talia sat at a folding table, cutting fabric samples. Reeves stood near the printer, frowning at invoices. Orlin had gone to inspect a damaged roof on one of their first project sites. Naraya sat on the floor beside a spread of wood samples, old tile, fabric swatches, and hand-drawn plans. She preferred working that way. On the floor, with materials close enough to touch, she felt connected to the spaces she wanted to rebuild. Every board, every stone, every line in a plan carried a question. Who would live here? Who would walk through this door tired after work? Who would sit by this window and feel safe for the first time in months? A knock came at the office door. Talia looked up. Reeves muttered, "If that is another supplier asking for payment, tell them hope is our current currency." Naraya almost smiled. She rose, brushed dust from her skirt, and opened the door. A man stood outside in a dark coat, rain on his shoulders, his hair slightly damp. He looked polished, but not careless. Wealth showed in the quality of his shoes and watch, yet his eyes held focus rather than entitlement. "Mrs. Whitlock?" he asked. Naraya's expression closed. "That name is not used here." He accepted the correction without offense. "Naraya Ashford," he said. "My name is Brennan Vale. I would like 10 minutes. Naraya studied him. Most men like him entered rooms expecting welcome. Brennan waited, as if the choice belonged to her. That alone made him different. Still, difference was not enough to earn trust. Naraya did not invite him into her office at first. She stepped into the hallway and closed the door halfway, leaving her team behind her and Brennan in front of her. The hallway was narrow, with cracked paint near the baseboards, and a flickering ceiling bulb that made the building look poorer than it already was. Brennan did not look around with judgment. He looked at her. "I have followed your work," he said. Naraya's face stayed unreadable. "I do not have much public work. You have more than people know." That answer tightened something in her chest. He reached into his coat and took out a slim folder, but he did not open it yet. Whitlock Crown's Harbor Row redesign, the Seattle Landmark Hotel, the Madison Avenue restoration, the Boston conversion near the financial district. Naraya said nothing. Brennan continued. The public credited Dorian Whitlock for all of them. Industry writers praised his new warmth, his improved use of historic detail, his guest-centered spaces. But the design language shifted before the company ever hired a new strategy team. His tone held no accusation, only certainty. Naraya crossed her arms. "That does not explain why you are here. I reviewed the early and final proposals. How did you get access to those? Investors' trade reports, developers' talk, old presentation files move through more hands than people admit." He opened the folder now and turned one page toward her. It showed notes from an old lobby plan, not her full handwriting, but her layout thinking, the seating flow, the preserved wood, the use of public access. the exact details Dorian had once praised over dinner, before presenting them as his instinct in a room that never asked for her name. Brennan looked at the page. His best projects carried your fingerprints. Nariah hated how much those words reached her, not because they were flattering, because someone had seen what her own husband ignored. Nariah let him inside, but only because the hallway had grown too cold. She did not offer coffee. She did not apologize for the cracked windows or mismatched chairs. She sat across from him at the folding table, while Talia pretended not to listen, and Reeves watched Brennan like a man calculating risk with every breath. Brennan placed the folder between them. I want to invest in Ashford Living, he said. Nariah gave a short laugh with no humor in it. You have seen the office. Either you are brave, careless, or looking for something I am not offering. I'm looking for a company early enough to shape the market, before the market notices it. No, she said. Men like you do not walk into offices like this for broken heaters and unpaid invoices. You see a scandal, a wounded woman, and a chance to buy influence before the price rises. Talia lowered her eyes. Reeves went still. Brennan did not flinch. Nariah leaned forward. Her voice stayed calm, but every word carried the weight of what she had survived. I have lived beside power. I know how it speaks when it wants access. It offers protection first, advice second, money third, control last. By the time the woman notices, her name is already on the door, but someone else holds the key. Brennan listened. That mattered. He did not interrupt to defend himself. He did not call her unfair. He did not try to prove he was different through charm. He allowed her suspicion to exist without punishing her for it. At last, he said, You are right to be careful. Nariah looked at him. I am not here to save you, he added. I would not insult you that way. For the first time, she had no quick reply. Brennan closed the folder and pushed it aside. No contract, no pressure, no polished speech about opportunity. Only quiet attention. What do you want Ashford Living to stand for? He asked. Nariah expected numbers. She expected questions about revenue, growth, market entry, and ownership percentages. She expected him to ask how soon his money would return with profit. Instead, he asked the one question Dorian had stopped asking long before their marriage fell apart. What do you want? The office seemed to settle around her. Rain tapped against the windows. A truck rolled past below. Somewhere downstairs, a furniture mover dragged a heavy chair across the floor. Nariah looked toward the whiteboard, where she had written her company mission in fading marker. Beauty with purpose. Trust before profit. People before image. Those lines looked simple, but they held everything she had lost and everything she wanted to rebuild. I want old spaces to matter again, she said. Not only to investors, to the people who walk past them every day and think no one cares enough to repair what they still need. Brennan nodded once. She continued, I want housing that does not shame ordinary families. Shops local owners are not priced out of before they open. Public rooms where people feel respected without needing wealth as proof. I want design that serves life, not ego. Reeves looked at her now, his guarded face softening. Talia stopped pretending to work. Brennan asked, And for you? Nariah's throat tightened. For a long time, her work had served Dorian's name. Her silence had served his comfort. Her ideas had served his reputation. Now her answer had to belong only to her. Nariah looked at Brennan, at the rain on his coat, at the folder filled with proof that someone had studied what the world refused to credit. One word, she said. Brennan waited. Proof. The room went quiet. Not empty quiet. Focused quiet. Nariah rested her hands on the table. Proof that losing a title does not mean losing yourself. Proof that being blamed does not make a woman guilty. Proof that quiet work still matters even when another person takes the praise. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I want Ashford Living to prove that trust is not soft. It is structure. It holds people longer than fear. It brings workers back. It brings clients back. It brings communities back. Dorian built many things with money. I want to build with belief. Brennan studied her with the expression of a man hearing more than a business answer. For Nariah, the word proof carried her father, her lost marriage, her stolen credit, the scandal, the silence, and the office where no one could tell her she did not belong. She had spent years shrinking her voice, so Dorian's world stayed comfortable. She had watched Celeste step into spaces Naraya had warmed with her mind. She had heard society call her disgraced, because it was easier than asking who had set the fire. Now she wanted proof that her worth did not depend on a husband's defense, a board's approval, or a family name. She wanted proof for every woman who had been told she was too much when she asked for respect. Brennan looked at the whiteboard again. Proof, he repeated. Naraya nodded. If that word frightens you, she said, you should leave before the rain stops. Brennan did not leave. He returned the next morning with revised terms. No takeover clause, no hidden control, no right to replace her leadership if growth slowed, no authority over hiring without her approval. His investment gave Ashford living breathing room, but left Naraya as the center of the company's direction. Priya reviewed the documents line by line. She tried to find the trap. Brennan waded through every revision. When Priya asked why he offered terms so clean, he answered without performance. Because a company built on trust should not begin with a contract that steals it. Naraya said nothing, but she heard him. The money arrived within the week. For the first time, Ashford Living paid every overdue invoice. Reeves looked close to tears when the supplier accounts cleared. Talia ordered proper drafting tools. Orland secured 2 crews for their first restoration site. Priya expanded the legal review into the scandal, no longer forced to choose between speed and cost. Yet Brennan did more than fund them. He showed up, without taking over. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He challenged weak plans without belittling anyone. He praised Talia's drawings by name. He treated Orland's field experience as wisdom. He never stood too close to Naraya in front of the team. Never used private concern as leverage, never acted as if investment gave him ownership of her pain. That was why Naraya began to respect him, not because he rescued her, because he understood she had already rescued herself. One evening, after a long planning session, Brennan paused at the door. Dorian Whitlock missed what was right in front of him, he said. Naraya looked up. Brennan's voice stayed steady. I have no intention of making the same mistake. He left before she had to answer, and for the first time in months, Naraya felt the future open without asking her to become smaller. Dorian Whitlock was halfway through a board meeting when the room shifted. It started with a knock at the glass door. No one interrupted Dorian's meetings without reason. His executives knew better than to walk in during a quarterly strategy review unless money, reputation, or control was at risk. So when Malcolm Greer, the head of development, entered with a sealed report in his hand, the conversation around the table faded at once. Dorian sat at the head of the table in a dark suit, one hand resting near a silver pen, his face calm enough to make other men nervous. Behind him, the skyline stretched across the high windows. Below him, the city moved as if Whitlock Crown still ruled it without challenge. That was how Dorian preferred the world. Ordered, measured, obedient. Malcolm stopped beside him and placed the report on the table. We have a delay on the riverfront redevelopment bid, he said. Dorian did not reach for the file at once. A delay from the city? Yes. Political? No. A few board members exchanged glances. Dorian's eyes narrowed. Budget issue? Malcolm hesitated, and that hesitation irritated him more than bad news itself. Say it. Malcolm cleared his throat. A competing proposal has gained serious attention with the city review panel. They want additional time before naming the preferred developer. The room became careful. Dorian leaned back. Whitlock Crown did not lose momentum on city projects. It had the capital, the relationships, the reputation, and the legal strength to crush smaller bidders before they became relevant. Delays happened, but not this kind of delay. He looked at the sealed report. What firm? Malcolm's jaw tightened. Dorian finally reached for the file. The paper felt heavier than it should have. The riverfront redevelopment contract was supposed to be simple. Whitlock Crown had spent months preparing for it. The project involved a neglected stretch of riverfront property with old warehouses, broken sidewalks, vacant storefronts, and land developers had circled for years. To Dorian's team, it was an opportunity to create luxury apartments, a boutique hotel, upscale shops, private dining, and a clean public walkway that would raise property values across the district. The company had already spoken with investors. Architects had prepared polished renderings. Financial analysts had projected returns. A few city officials had privately praised Whitlock Crown's capacity to deliver fast. Dorian expected resistance from neighborhood groups. He expected requests for affordable units, local business space, and historical preservation. His team had prepared language for all of that. Not deep commitments, not costly promises, enough warmth to satisfy public concern while keeping the project profitable. That was the plan. Now the city wanted more time, because another proposal had made Whitlock Crown's work look incomplete. Malcolm opened the report and pointed to the summary page. The competing proposal focuses on mixed-income housing, protected space for local businesses, preserved architectural features, job training agreements, and community access without cutting long-term value. Dorian stared at him. That sounds like a non-profit brochure. It has financial strength behind it, Malcolm said. The numbers are leaner than ours, but the long-term civic impact score is higher. Their public support is stronger too. One board member scoffed. Public support does not fund construction. Malcolm looked uncomfortable. In this case, it may decide who gets the contract. Dorian's patience thinned. He turned the page. The first line stopped him. Ashford Living. For several seconds he did not move. The name sat there, clean and impossible. A smaller company had delayed his deal. A company named after the woman he thought the scandal had removed from his world. Dorian opened the full profile. Founder and Chief Executive, Nariah Ashford. Not Nariah Whitlock. Not Mrs. Whitlock. Not his wife. Nariah Ashford. The name struck him with a force he did not show. Around the board table, men waited for anger. They expected him to dismiss her. They expected some cold remark about wounded pride, revenge, or poor judgment. Dorian gave them none of that. He kept reading. Ashford Living had been formed quietly in Chicago. It specialized in restoring older American buildings into housing, commercial spaces, and community-centered properties. The firm had already completed smaller projects, with praise from local leaders, shop owners, and neighborhood committees. Its proposal had been described by city reviewers as thoughtful, financially careful, and deeply responsive to resident needs. Dorian turned another page. There were notes on her team. Orlin Voss, contractor. Priya Knoll, legal advisor. Talia Fern, designer. Reeves Calder, finance. Brennan Vale, investor. Dorian paused at Brennan's name. He knew of him. Vale came from private capital, old wealth, and quiet influence. He did not attach his name to foolish ventures. If Brennan had invested in Nariah, he had seen something worth protecting. That bothered Dorian more than he wanted to admit. He continued. A quote from a city official appeared in bold. Ashford Living listened before they designed. Dorian's thumb pressed against the page. He had heard that thinking before. At their dining table, in hotel lobbies, in old buildings where Nariah would touch a wall and understand what everyone else missed. The room waited for him to speak. Dorian closed the file halfway, but his eyes stayed on her name. Nariah had not only returned, she had returned with authority. Her photo appeared near the back of the report. Dorian did not expect it to affect him. It did. Nariah stood outside a renovated brick building, wearing a cream blazer, simple earrings, and no wedding ring. Her hair was pulled back from her face. Her smile was small, not eager, not forced, not made for cameras. She looked like a woman who had stopped asking the world to believe her and had started proving herself through results. That calm unsettled him. He had expected sadness, anger, some visible sign that the scandal had left marks deep enough for him to recognize. Instead, she looked steadier than she had in the final months of their marriage. The softness remained, but it no longer looked fragile. Her eyes held a kind of peace he had not seen when she lived in the penthouse. Under his roof, she had often looked careful, always measuring when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to avoid his irritation. In that photo, she looked free. Dorian hated the word as soon as it entered his mind. Free from what? From him? From the Whitlock name? From the silence he had given her when she needed defense? A memory crossed him before he stopped it. Nariah, at the ballroom staircase, her hand on the rail, her face pale but proud. her eyes locked on his, waiting. Defend me. He had not. Dorian placed the report flat on the table. A board member said, "We should treat this as a reputation play. She is using the separation for sympathy." Dorian looked up slowly. No. The word left his mouth before he decided to say it. The board member blinked. Dorian's eyes returned to the photo. Naraya did not look like a woman begging for sympathy. She looked like a woman who had built a door where everyone else expected a grave. Celeste noticed the change in him before anyone else did. That evening, Dorian sat alone in his study with the Ashford Living Report open on his desk. Dinner had gone cold on a tray near the window. The city lights reflected against the glass, but he saw only the page in front of him. Naraya's photo stared back. He had read the report 3 times. Each reading made him less angry and more disturbed. Celeste entered without knocking, wearing a soft ivory dress and carrying the controlled concern she used whenever she wanted to appear gentle. She came to stand behind his chair, her perfume reaching him before her hand touched his shoulder. "You missed dinner," she said. "I was working." She looked down. Her fingers tightened slightly when she saw Naraya's face on the report. Dorian felt the change. Celeste gave a quiet laugh, but it carried no warmth. "You are giving her too much attention. She is bidding against Whitlock Crown. She is trying to embarrass you." Dorian closed the folder, but not because he agreed. Celeste moved beside the desk. "That is all this is. She lost her place, so now she wants to prove she still matters." Dorian looked at her. For months, Celeste's words had soothed his pride. She knew how to make every hard truth feel like someone else's fault. Yet tonight, her voice sounded too sharp, too personal, too threatened. "She submitted a stronger proposal," he said. Celeste's face tightened for 1 second before she softened it again. "She wants people to compare you. They already are, because she planned it that way." Dorian said nothing. Celeste stepped closer. "You cannot let her turn your name into her comeback story." The phrase should have moved him. Instead, it made him think of Naraya's steady eyes in the photo. A comeback story. No, this was not performance. This was work. After Celeste left the study, Dorian remained at his desk. The house was quiet, but his thoughts refused to settle. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to look at Naraya without the filter of scandal, shame, or family pressure. He remembered the way she used to sit across from him late at night, reviewing plans while he pretended her ideas were only suggestions. He remembered how often she had seen the weakness in a project before his experts did. He remembered calling her sensitive when she asked for respect. He remembered letting Celeste stand closer, while Naraya stood farther away inside her own marriage. The report lay open again. Community trust, lower costs, historic preservation, local business support, human-centered design. Those were not tricks. They were Naraya's language. He knew that because he had borrowed it for years. That truth cut deeper than competition. Naraya had not built Ashford Living to embarrass him. She had built it because she no longer had space in the life he controlled. She was not shouting his name for attention. She was building a name that did not need him attached to it. Dorian leaned back and covered his mouth with one hand. He had believed silence would make the scandal pass. He had believed distance would protect the company. He had believed choosing Celeste would make life easier because Celeste admired him without asking him to face himself. Now Naraya was across the table from him in business. And for the first time, he felt the full weight of what he had lost. Not a wife who needed saving. Not a woman who wanted revenge. A partner he had failed to recognize until she became his rival. Viewers, let me ask you this. Is Dorian's regret real, or does he only care now because Naraya is winning? Comment your thoughts below. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to Love Tales with Mr. Easton for more stories where love, loyalty, and respect reveal the truth people try to hide. By the time the City Review panel announced the final round, the Riverfront Redevelopment Project had become the most watched business contest of the year. Whitlock Crown and Ashford Living were the last 2 firms standing. That fact alone changed the mood across the city. For years, Whitlock Crown had entered public bids with the confidence of a company used to winning before the real vote began. Its name carried money, political access, luxury branding, and a long record of finishing projects on schedule. When Dorian Whitlock wanted a property, People assumed the only question left was how expensive it would become. Ashford Living was different. It was smaller, younger, less connected. It did not own towers across the country. It did not have a private army of lobbyists, legacy architects, and polished publicists. It had Nariah, a rented office, a small team, a careful budget, and growing community trust. That trust became the problem Whitlock Crown could not buy. Residents who had ignored earlier meetings started attending city sessions because Ashford Living had spoken to them before asking for support. Shop owners submitted letters. Local builders asked to be included. Older residents spoke about preserving the walls, streets, and storefronts that carried their family memories. Young families wanted housing they could afford without leaving the area they loved. The city panel could not dismiss that. So the final presentation was scheduled inside the Municipal Planning Hall, a place built for serious decisions, not social performance. No champagne, no society cameras at every corner, no Whitlock family stage, only proposals, only questions, only proof. Dorian received the notice in his office and stared at Nariah's company name beneath his own. For the first time, he understood that this was no longer a scandal story. This was business. And his wife, the woman he failed to defend, had become the one competitor he could not ignore. Dorian arrived first. His black car pulled up outside the planning hall 10 minutes ahead of schedule. He stepped out in a tailored charcoal suit, his expression controlled, his posture perfect, his entire presence shaped by years of walking into rooms already tilted in his favor. Behind him came senior executives, legal advisors, finance officers, brand consultants, and development specialists. Every person looked prepared. Every folder had been printed with expensive precision. Every rendering carried the clean, glossy finish Whitlock Crown was known for. The message was clear: scale, experience, certainty. Dorian entered like a man who understood power because power had followed him most of his life. Officials greeted him respectfully. A few investors waiting outside the chamber nodded in recognition. Reporters lifted their phones. Some whispered his name, as if the result still belonged to him. He accepted the attention without smiling. Inside, Celeste walked near him in a cream blazer, her face arranged into calm support. She had insisted on attending as part of the branding team. Dorian had allowed it, though her presence no longer settled him the way it once had. Since the Ashford report, something about her felt tighter, sharper, less generous. Still, she played her role. "You have the stronger company," she said softly, as they approached the chamber doors. "Do not let her turn emotion into leverage." Dorian looked ahead. This is not about emotion. Celeste's gaze flicked toward him. With Nariah, it always is. He did not answer. His team took their seats on the right side of the room. Their presentation screens were tested twice. Their folders lined the table in perfect order. Dorian reviewed the executive summary, but his eyes kept moving to the empty seats across from him. He told himself he was waiting for a competitor. His chest knew better. He was waiting for Nariah. Nariah arrived without noise. No long line of executives followed her. No polished publicist rushed ahead to arrange her chair. No one stepped into the room trying to prove she belonged there. She walked in with Orlin, Priya, Talia, Reeves, and Brennan Vale. That was all. A small team, but they moved like people who trusted one another. Orlin carried rolled site plans under one arm. Priya held the legal and access files. Talia had the community renderings. Reeves carried the cost breakdowns. Brennan walked slightly behind Nariah, present but not claiming the moment. Nariah wore a deep green suit. No diamonds, no wedding ring, no attempt to dress like the woman Whitlock society used to display beside Dorian. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was calm. Her eyes moved across the room, not searching for approval, but reading the space with the same quiet focus Dorian remembered from Boston years earlier. When she saw him, she did not freeze. She gave one small nod. Professional, controlled, distant. That hurt more than anger would have. Dorian rose before he meant to. The movement was slight, but Celeste noticed. So did Nariah. For one brief moment, the room held the memory of a marriage inside a business meeting. Nariah looked away first. Her team settled at the opposite table. Talia whispered something to her, and Nariah answered with a soft smile. Orlan adjusted the plans. Reeves checked his numbers. Priya scanned the panel list. Brennan leaned in and said a few quiet words. Naraya nodded. She looked supported, not owned, not managed. Supported. Dorian watched the difference with a feeling he had no name for. Beside him, Celeste crossed her legs and stared forward. The panel chair called the meeting to order. Dorian presented first. He rose with the ease of a man trained to make rooms listen. His voice carried confidence, polish, and command. He thanked the panel, acknowledged the importance of the riverfront, and spoke about Whitlock Crown's record of delivering complex developments across major cities. His first slides were flawless. Aerial renderings showed glass-fronted apartments catching sunset over the river. A boutique hotel stood near the center of the design, sleek and profitable. Shops lined the main walkway. Restaurants opened toward the water. A private event space crowned the top floor of a restored warehouse, giving the project the luxury signature Whitlock Crown believed the city wanted. Dorian spoke about job creation. He spoke about tax revenue. He spoke about construction timelines, tourism growth, investor confidence, and long-term property value. Every number sounded strong. Every chart supported his case. His finance chief explained projected returns. His legal advisor outlined risk controls. His development team promised speed, structure, and national attention. For many people, it would have been enough. A rich plan from a rich company. A controlled design from a controlled man. A project that would make the district shine in brochures and attract people with money to spend. Yet, as Dorian moved through the slides, he noticed the panel listening without warmth. They respected the proposal, but respect was not the same as belief. A city planner asked about local business protections. His team answered with language about future opportunities. A housing advocate asked about affordability. His finance officer gave a careful response tied to market conditions. Dorian knew the answers were acceptable. He also knew they were thin. Across the room, Naria took notes. She did not smirk. She did not react for effect. She listened like someone preparing to answer what money had failed to understand. When Naraya stood, the room changed in a quieter way. She did not begin with the company's history. She did not open with awards, investor backing, or a grand statement about transforming the skyline. She placed one hand lightly on the table, looked at the panel, and thanked them for allowing Ashford Living to return after months of community meetings. Return. The word mattered. It told the room her team had not designed from a distance. Talia brought up the first slide. It was not a polished tower. It was a street map marked with homes, small shops, bus stops, repair yards, schools, and the old warehouse walls Whitlock Crown planned to cover or remove. Naraya spoke about the people who already lived near the riverfront. A baker whose rent had doubled twice in 4 years. A retired teacher who wanted safer walking paths. A mechanic whose family had worked from the same corner shop for 3 generations. A group of young builders who wanted training contracts instead of being pushed aside by outside firms. She did not use them as decoration. She showed how each concern shaped the design. Mixed-income housing near transport routes, reserved storefronts for local businesses, preserved brickwork and historic signage, public seating near the water, job training agreements tied to construction phases, small vendor spaces that allowed local ownership instead of outside takeover. Reeves walked the panel through the budget, careful and clear. Orlan explained how preservation could reduce waste and protect character without stalling construction. Priya addressed legal protections for existing tenants. Talia showed warm renderings that kept old walls, open courtyards, and human movement at the center. Naraya ended that section with one sentence. A district is not empty because rich people have not arrived yet. It already belongs to the people who kept it alive when no one else wanted it. The panel grew still. Dorian lowered his eyes. Naraya walked to the final slide herself. It showed 2 rooms. On the left, one of Whitlock Crown's old luxury lounges from years earlier. Beautiful, expensive, perfectly arranged. Empty. On the right, Ashford Living's proposed community market at the riverfront. Restored beams, local stalls, shared seating, children near wide windows. Workers, families, visitors, and shop owners using the same space without anyone being pushed to the edge. She did not name Whitlock Crown. She did not need to. For years, Naraya said, I helped build rooms where people with power felt comfortable. Dorian went still. The sentence moved through him like a private memory entering a public room. Naraya continued, steady and composed. I learned how wealth speaks. I learned what it protects. I learned how easily beautiful spaces become closed spaces when no one asks who gets left outside. Celeste shifted in her seat. Naraya's eyes stayed on the panel. This project should not become another place where ordinary people watch wealth arrive and wait for the day they are priced out. It should become a place where families feel respected, where local owners have room to grow, where history remains visible, where public space feels public, and where profit does not require the erasure of dignity. No one interrupted. Not the panel, not the press, not Dorian's team. Naraya clicked to the final line of the proposal. Trust is a business asset. She said it aloud. Trust keeps people in a place. Trust brings them back. Trust protects value longer than fear, longer than status, and longer than a name written on a tower. Her voice softened, but did not weaken. Now, I want to build places where ordinary people feel respected. Dorian looked at her across the room. For the first time, he heard everything he should have heard when she was still standing beside him. The decision came 2 days after the final pitch. For 48 hours, the city waited. Reporters called officials. Investors called contacts. Developers searched for leaks from the review panel. Whitlock Crown remained publicly confident because that was how power survived uncertainty. Dorian's team told the press they were proud of the proposal and ready to partner with the city. Inside the company, no one felt calm. Dorian stayed in his office long after everyone else left. The Ashford Living presentation had not left his mind. He kept hearing Naraya's final words about building places where ordinary people felt respected. He had sat through thousands of pitches, most faded, by the time he returned to his car. Hers stayed. At 4:12 p.m., the city released the decision. Ashford Living had won. The announcement landed across every phone in Whitlock Crown's executive suite at the same time. One alert, several gasps, a few sharp breaths. Someone in the legal department whispered, "No way." Malcolm Greer stood near the window with his hand over his mouth, staring at the message as if the words might change if he blinked. Dorian read the announcement twice. Ashford Living had been selected for its community-centered plan, preservation strategy, local business protections, and long-term trust with residents. The panel praised its financial discipline and called its proposal the strongest fit for the district's future. Dorian placed the phone on his desk. He did not shout. He did not curse. He did not throw the report aside. That would have been easier for everyone in the room. Anger would have given his team something familiar to manage. Instead, he sat completely still. Across the city, in a small Chicago office with cracked windows and mismatched chairs, Naraya Ashford received the same message. Her team erupted. Talia cried first. Reeves laughed in disbelief. Orlan pulled Naraya into a rough, fatherly hug. Priya closed her eyes, as if silently thanking every difficult day that had led them there. Naraya stood in the center of it all, one hand pressed to her mouth. For months, the world had called her finished. Now the same world had to learn her new name. The first headline appeared before sunset. Disgraced billionaire's wife defeats Whitlock Crown in major city deal. Dorian saw it on a business site while sitting alone in the back of his car. He read the line once, twice. The word that burned was not defeats. It was disgraced. Even in victory, the media reached first for the shame placed on Naraya. They did not call her founder. They did not call her chief executive. They did not call her designer, strategist, builder, or leader. They called her his wife, his disgraced wife. The label should have protected his pride, because it still tied her identity to him. Instead, it made him feel small. The woman who had just beaten him had done it, while carrying a name the world had used to wound her. Other headlines followed. Naraya Ashford shocks industry with riverfront win. Whitlock Crown loses high-profile bid to founder once linked to company leak. From social scandal to business upset, Naraya Ashford takes the riverfront. At Whitlock Crown, The humiliation moved quickly. Investors called for explanations. Board members wanted a strategy session. Senior executives tried to blame politics, public pressure, and emotional decision-making. No one wanted to say the simplest truth. Ashford Living had understood the project better. Dorian returned to headquarters before nightfall. Every face he passed looked carefully neutral. That bothered him. People were not shocked only because the company had lost. They were shocked because Naraya had won, his former wife, the woman they had allowed society to condemn, the woman they had stopped speaking about unless lawyers required it. Now her name filled the screens in his own building. In the main conference room, one executive suggested they challenge the decision. Another said they could pressure the city on procedural grounds. Dorian listened without speaking. He looked through the glass wall toward the skyline. For years, he had believed winning proved strength. Now he was learning that losing to the woman he failed could expose a truth winning had helped him avoid. Celeste waited until they were alone before her control broke. The study doors had barely closed when she turned on him. The soft voice she used for cameras vanished. The careful posture, the mild expression, the gentle concern, all fell away, as if they had only been clothes she wore in public. "She humiliated you," Celeste said. Dorian stood near his desk, removing his cufflinks slowly. "The city chose her proposal. Do not make this sound fair. It was a competition." Celeste stepped closer, her eyes bright with anger. "No, Dorian. It was a performance. She used sympathy, community language, and that wounded wife story to make you look like the villain." He looked at her. She never mentioned the marriage. She did not have to. Everyone knows. Every reporter knows. Every panel member knows. That is her weapon. Dorian studied her face. Celeste was not only upset, she looked insulted, as if Naraya's victory had taken something that belonged to her personally. "She is going to keep doing this," Celeste continued. "First the riverfront, next another city contract, next investors, next your own clients. You need to crush her before she steals more." The word crush sat between them. Dorian had heard ruthless advice before. In his world, people often used polite language to hide ugly intentions. Celeste did not hide it this time. "She won one project," he said. "She won your attention," Celeste snapped. That line changed the room. Dorian's eyes narrowed. Celeste seemed to realize she had revealed too much. She softened her voice and reached for his arm. "I mean your company's attention, your boards, the media's. She wants the story." Dorian did not move toward her. For the first time, he saw something raw beneath her elegance. Not concern for him, fear of Naraya. After Celeste left, Dorian remained in the study, with her words moving through his mind. "You need to crush her." She had spoken with the anger of someone defending more than a business interest. Dorian had seen competitors lose. He had watched executives panic when contracts slipped away. He knew the difference between strategy and personal fear. Celeste had looked afraid, not of Ashford Living's money, not of Naraya's small team, not of one project, afraid of what Naraya's rise might reveal. That thought made Dorian open the lower drawer of his desk. Inside was the original internal review folder from the leaks scandal. He had not touched it in months. At the time, he had accepted the conclusions quickly because the board demanded speed, Odessa demanded distance, and Celeste had stood near him looking wounded on his behalf. He had told himself he was protecting the company. Now that excuse felt weak. Dorian placed the folder on the desk and sat down. The first page contained a summary from the compliance team. Naraya's old administrative login had accessed confidential design files. The access point had been traced through external routing. The transfer had occurred hours before the charity auction. The report marked Naraya's account as the center of the breach. He had read those lines before. This time, he read what sat around them. Who authorized the review? Who supplied the first alert? Who pushed the timeline to be presented before the board meeting? Which department requested media monitoring before the accusation became public? Dorian's fingers slowed on the page. Celeste's department appeared more often than he remembered. Brand risk assessment, public response planning, external narrative control. Those words should not have been moving so early in the file. They suggested They suggested someone had prepared for damage before the public scandal broke. Dorian leaned back. A cold thought entered his mind. What if Naraya had not fallen into the scandal? What if someone had placed her there? For the first time, Dorian studied the evidence as a husband who had failed his wife, not as a businessman protecting shareholders. That difference changed everything. Before, he had looked for risk. Now, he looked for truth. He read the access log again. Naraya's old administrative login had been used at 9:46 p.m. on the night before the auction. At first, that had seemed damaging. Yet one note in the appendix gave him pause. Naraya had been checked into a private wellness retreat outside the city that evening, attending a donor recovery event connected to one of Odessa's committees. Dorian remembered the event. He had not gone with her. He had told her he was too busy. The retreat had strict digital rules in certain areas. Guests checked personal devices at entry during private sessions. The attendance record showed Naraya had entered the main hall before the file transfer window opened. There was a time-stamped security note placing her there. Dorian frowned. Why had no one emphasized that? He turned another page. The transfer had not come from her personal laptop. It came from an outside device using her old login credentials. The device identifier had been partially masked. At the time, compliance called it inconclusive. Now Dorian saw a note attached in smaller print. Device activity matched a cluster previously tied to temporary consultants. Temporary consultants. Celeste's team used outside consultants during the rebrand. Dorian's pulse slowed in a dangerous way. He read further. The internal review had been completed in less than 24 hours. Too fast, too neat, too eager to present Naraya as the only visible problem. He remembered Naraya at the ballroom. He remembered her confusion, not guilt, confusion. He closed his eyes briefly. He had watched his wife stand accused and had mistaken shock for shame. The final connection sat in a technical appendix Dorian had barely glanced at months earlier. A data analyst had flagged an access pattern that required follow-up. The routed login passed through Naraya's old account, but the device behavior matched one used by Celeste's consulting division during a brand campaign review. The analyst had not named Celeste directly. He had written that the device group belonged to external brand strategy support. Dorian turned the page. A second note stated that Celeste's assistant, Mara Venn, resigned 2 days after the leak. No exit interview completed. No device audit finalized. No follow-up recorded. Dorian stared at the lines until the words blurred. He reached for his phone and called the head of compliance. "I need the full device map from the leak investigation," he said. There was a pause. "Mr. Whitlock, that file was closed. Open it. Tonight? Now." He ended the call and looked back at the report. The truth was not complete yet, but its shape had started to show. Naraya's account had been used, but not by Naraya. The routing had pointed toward her, but the device trail led elsewhere. The response team had moved fast, but not toward fairness. Celeste's department had appeared too early, too often, and too cleanly. Dorian stood and walked to the window. The city below looked the same, but he did not. He had believed the worst about Naraya because belief had been easier than courage. He had chosen the company, the board, his mother's approval, and Celeste's comfort before asking the one question a husband should have asked first. What if my wife is innocent? His reflection stared back from the glass. For months, he had called his silence responsibility. Now, it looked like betrayal. And if the evidence was right, Celeste had not only taken Naraya's place beside him, she had helped steal her name. Dorian waited until morning before he confronted Celeste. He did not trust himself that night. Anger would have made the conversation loud, and he wanted it clean. He wanted facts on the table, not emotion clouding the truth. So he spent the early hours pulling every document he could access. The internal review, the device notes, the timestamps, the resignation record from Celeste's assistant, the communication logs between brand strategy and compliance. By sunrise, the story he once accepted no longer held together. Celeste arrived at his penthouse at 9, smiling as if the previous night had been a small disagreement that a soft voice could repair. She wore pale gray, carried a leather bag, and leaned in to kiss his cheek. Dorian stepped back. The movement stopped her. "Sit down," he said. Celeste studied his face. "Is something wrong?" He placed the file on the table between them. Her eyes dropped to it. For 1 second she lost her calm. Dorian saw it. "The leak investigation," he said. "I reviewed it again." Celeste's smile returned, but it had less strength. "Why would you do that now?" "Because your reaction to Naraya winning sounded less like concern and more like fear." Her face changed. "That is unfair. So is framing my wife." Celeste's lips parted. Dorian opened the file and turned it toward her. Naraya's old login was used, but not from her laptop. The access came from an outside device connected to a group used by your consulting division. The internal review was rushed. Your department prepared public response notes before the accusation became public. Your assistant resigned 2 days after the leak, with no exit interview and no device audit. Celeste stared at the papers without touching them. Dorian's voice stayed low. "I am asking once. What did you do?" Celeste denied it first. That was expected. She looked at Dorian with wide eyes, as if pain had offended her more than the accusation. "You cannot believe I would do something like that. I asked what you did. I did nothing. You had access. So did half the consulting team. Your assistant resigned." She was overwhelmed. "The device trail connects to your department. That does not mean me." Dorian watched her carefully. Months earlier, he would have accepted the tears forming in her eyes. He would have believed her trembling voice. He would have mistaken her fear of exposure for hurt. This time, he saw each shift as a choice. Celeste's eyes filled. "You are doing this because Naraya won," she whispered. "She gets one contract, and suddenly, I am the enemy." Dorian said nothing. Her tears fell faster. "I stood beside you when she embarrassed you. I protected you when everyone was laughing. I helped carry the weight, while your wife disappeared." Dorian's jaw tightened. "Naraya disappeared because I abandoned her." Celeste wiped her face, but her softness began to harden. "She wanted you to feel guilty. She always wanted you smaller. Every correction, every little design opinion, every quiet look across a table. She made you feel wrong for being who you are." "No," Dorian said. "She asked me to be better." Celeste gave a sharp laugh. "Better? She wanted your name, your platform, your approval, and now she wants your market." Dorian leaned forward. "You are still blaming her. Because she is the reason you are looking at me like this." "No, your actions are the reason." The tears stopped. Celeste's face became still, stripped of the gentle mask she had worn for so long. "She was in my way," she said. The words entered the room with brutal clarity. Dorian looked at Celeste, and for the first time, he saw the truth without romance, pride, or excuse standing between them. She had never loved him in the way Naraya once had. Celeste had loved his access, his rooms, his last name, his ability to make every door open before she touched the handle. She had studied him well enough to offer admiration where he felt weakest. She had learned how to praise his power, excuse his distance, and make him feel understood without requiring him to grow. At the time, he had called that peace. Now he understood it had only been comfort without accountability. Celeste stood from the chair. "You chose me," she said. Dorian rose too. "I chose badly." Her eyes flashed. "Do not rewrite the past because your wife learned how to win." That sentence struck him because it carried no love, no grief, no concern for what had been broken, only outrage that Naraya had survived and returned stronger. "You were never trying to build with me," Dorian said. "You were trying to replace her." Celeste's mouth twisted. She had everything and did not know how to keep it. She had a husband who failed her. She had a man most women would beg for. She had a man who stayed silent while she was shamed in front of the whole city. Celeste stepped closer. "Do you hear yourself? She has turned you against the only person who stood beside you." Dorian looked at the file on the table. "No," he said. "You stood beside my image. Naraya stood beside the man I was too proud to become." Celeste's face lost color. There it was. The truth neither of them could soften. Celeste had not wanted Dorian's heart. She had wanted the seat close enough to power to be mistaken for power itself, and Dorian had let her sit there. Dorian ended it without drama. No shouting, no final embrace, no soft promise to protect her from consequences. He had spent too many months calling weakness, restraint, and avoidance wisdom. That morning, he chose clarity. "You are no longer connected to Whitlock Crown," he said. Celeste stared at him. "You cannot do that." "I can. You need me." "I needed honesty. I chose flattery." Her hands curled at her sides. "You will regret humiliating me." Dorian looked at her, calm now in a way that did not come from pride. "No. I regret humiliating my wife by allowing you to stand where you had no right to stand." The words changed him as he said them. For months, he had reduced the damage to a scandal, a public mistake, a marriage strained by pressure. Now the shape of his failure grew clearer. He had not only been fooled, he had made being fooled easy. Celeste had found cracks in him, yes, but he had opened the doors. He had enjoyed the praise. He had punished Naria's honesty, because it asked more of him. Celeste gathered her bag, but she paused near the door. "She will never forgive you," she said. Dorian did not answer right away. He thought of Naria standing in the ballroom, her eyes waiting, his mouth silent, the room judging her while he protected himself. "She should not forgive me quickly," he said. Celeste left. The door closed with a sound that felt final, yet not freeing. Ending the affair did not repair anything. It only removed the woman who had helped him destroy what mattered. Dorian still had to face the deeper truth. He had owed Naria loyalty before evidence. He had owed her defense before certainty. He had owed her the kind of love that reached for her hand when the world turned cold. He had given her silence. Now he had to stand before her with nothing left to hide behind. 3 days later, Dorian went to Ashford Living. He did not bring lawyers. He did not bring assistants. He did not call ahead and demand a private entrance. For the first time in years, he walked into someone else's space without expecting it to bend around him. The office was above an old furniture showroom, tucked into a building he would have ignored before Naria taught him to see value in overlooked places. The stairs creaked beneath his shoes. The walls carried age. The air smelled faintly of coffee, wood, and paper. At the top, he paused outside a glass door with Ashford Living written in clean black letters. Her name was not on it as decoration. It was authority. Inside, the office moved with purpose. Talia stood near a large table, reviewing warm-toned renderings with Orlan. Reeves argued with a supplier on the phone, one hand pressed over a ledger. Priya sat by the window, reading a legal packet with a pencil tucked behind her ear. No one looked afraid. No one straightened in panic. No one performed loyalty for a powerful owner. They worked because they believed in the person leading them. Dorian felt the difference at once. Whitlock Crown ran on control. People moved fast around him because they feared disappointing him. Naria's office moved with trust. People challenged, spoke, corrected, and listened. Her leadership did not shrink them. It made them braver. Talia noticed him first. Her smile disappeared. "I am here to see Naria," Dorian said. Priya rose from her chair. "Does she know you are coming?" "No. Wait here." Dorian nodded. That simple instruction humbled him more than any public insult could have. He stood near the door like any visitor, surrounded by the proof of everything Naria had built after he failed to protect her. Naria opened her office door a few minutes later. She wore a dark blue blouse, tailored trousers, and no jewelry except a thin watch. Her face showed no shock, no anger, no softness offered for his comfort. She looked at him the way one looks at a difficult truth that has arrived late. "Dorian." Her voice was calm. That hurt more than if she had shouted. "Naria," he said. She stepped aside, allowing him into the office, but she did not close the door. The choice was clear. No secrecy, no private emotional corner where he could control the moment. He looked around. Plans covered one wall. Photos of residents and restored buildings filled another. Her father's framed photo sat on the desk. This was not a company built from revenge. It was built from purpose. "You built all of this," he said. "Yes. I should have known." Her eyes held his. "You did know. You chose not to see it." The words struck cleanly. Dorian lowered his gaze. I found evidence in the leak review. Your account was used, but the device trail connects to Celeste's consulting team. I am reopening the investigation. Publicly, Naraya did not look surprised. I know, she said. He looked up. Priya found enough to question it weeks ago. We were waiting for the right time. Shame moved through him. Even now, she had been ahead of him. I am sorry, he said, for the scandal, for Celeste. For every room where I took your mind and left your name behind. Naraya listened without rescuing him from discomfort. But do you know what hurt most? She asked. He swallowed. The accusation? No. Her voice stayed steady, but her eyes carried the wound he had placed there. People lie. People scheme. People judge. That is painful. But it is not what broke me. Dorian could barely breathe. What broke me was your silence. I married you because I believed, when the whole world turned against me, you would still reach for my hand. He looked down. Naraya continued. The scandal stole my name for a season. Your silence taught me I had trusted the wrong person with my heart. Dorian did not clear Naraya's name with a private apology. He knew private regret would not repair public damage. He had failed her in front of the world, so he had to correct the lie where the world could hear it. For the first time in his career, he called a press briefing, without trying to protect his own image first. The room filled quickly. Reporters came expecting another carefully worded Whitlock statement. Board members stood near the side wall with stiff faces. Senior executives watched him with open concern. No one knew how much he planned to say, and that lack of control frightened them. Dorian walked to the podium alone. No Celeste, no Odessa, no advisors standing close enough to guide his words. Only him, the cameras, and the truth he had avoided for too long. He placed both hands on the podium and looked straight ahead. Months ago, he began, Naraya Ashford was publicly accused of leaking confidential design files from Whitlock Crown. At the time, our company responded with speed, not fairness. We acted to protect the brand before we protected the truth. The room went still. He continued. That was a failure of leadership. It was also a failure of loyalty. A reporter raised her hand, but Dorian did not stop. Naraya did not receive the defense she deserved from this company. She did not receive it from me. Her work, her integrity, and her years of contribution were treated as secondary to reputation management. That was wrong. The words cost him, not because they were difficult to say, because each one exposed the man he had been. He looked into the cameras, knowing Naraya might see it later, knowing she owed him no forgiveness for finally speaking. Whitlock Crown failed Naraya Ashford, he said. I failed her. After the statement, Dorian released the findings. The report did not hide behind soft language. It named the internal failures clearly. Naraya's old administrative login had been used, but not from her personal device. The file transfer had been routed through credentials connected to her account, while device behavior matched equipment tied to Celeste Arden's external brand strategy support team. The evidence showed that compliance had ignored warning signs. It showed that the internal review moved too fast. It showed that public response notes were prepared before the facts had been properly examined. It showed that Mara Venn, Celeste's assistant, resigned shortly after the leak without a completed exit interview or proper device audit. Dorian ordered the report sent to the board, the city review office, Whitlock Crown's investors, and every major outlet that had carried the earlier accusation. This time, Naraya's name did not travel with shame attached to it. It traveled with correction. The fallout came hard. Reporters began asking why Celeste's department had not been examined closely from the beginning. Investors questioned the board's judgment. Employees whispered in hallways about how many people had known the investigation felt rushed, but stayed quiet to protect their jobs. Celeste issued a denial through a lawyer, claiming she had been unfairly targeted. Dorian did not answer her publicly. He let the evidence speak. Naraya read the report in her office after Priya placed it on her desk. For several minutes, she said nothing. Talia cried quietly near the doorway. Orland cursed under his breath. Reeves said the company would need to prepare for a wave of calls. Priya watched Naraya's face, ready for anger, relief, or collapse. Naraya only touched the page where her innocence was confirmed. It is strange, she said softly. Priya leaned closer. What is? Naraya looked up. How late truth arrives, and how heavy it still feels. Odessa Whitlock came to Dorian's office that same evening. She entered without waiting for permission, wrapped in a black coat, her expression carved from old pride and fresh fury. The press briefing had humiliated her. The report had shaken the family name. For Odessa, truth mattered less than the fact that Dorian had admitted weakness where cameras could record it. You have damaged this family, she said. Dorian stood near the window, his tie loosened, his face tired but steady. No, he replied. The damage was already there. You gave them a confession. I gave them the truth. Odessa's eyes sharpened. You gave them a weapon. Men in your position do not bleed in public. They manage. They contain. They protect what generations built. Dorian turned from the window. That is what I thought I was doing when I let Naraya stand alone. Odessa's jaw tightened. Naraya is not the family. She was my wife. She became a liability. No, Dorian said, his voice colder now. She became a liability because we treated her innocence like an inconvenience. Odessa stepped closer. Public apologies make you look weak. Dorian looked at his mother for a long moment. All his life, Odessa had taught him that control was strength. That emotion had to be hidden. That family image mattered more than private pain. He had followed that lesson until it cost him the only person who had loved him without worshipping his power. No, he said at last. Letting my wife carry my shame made me weak. Odessa had no answer. For once, silence belonged to her. Dorian picked up the report and placed it on the desk between them. You can defend the family name, he said. I am going to become someone worthy of it. Naraya refused to turn her life into a revenge campaign. That surprised people. Reporters wanted anger. Interviewers wanted tears. Commentators wanted her to expose every private wound and turn Dorian's failure into a public feast. Invitations came from business podcasts, luxury magazines, morning shows, and social channels that had mocked her months earlier. Priya advised caution. Reeves advised strategy. Talia wanted the world to hear how much Naraya had endured. Orlan wanted a list of names and a brick wall far away from cameras. Naraya listened to everyone, but she chose her own path. She gave one short statement. My name has been cleared. I am grateful to everyone who continued to believe in my work. Ashford Living will remain focused on building spaces rooted in trust, dignity, and purpose. That was all. No insult. No long emotional speech. No attempt to make pain her brand. Inside the office, her team struggled to understand how she stayed so composed. Talia asked her one evening, Don't you want people to know what they did to you? Naraya looked at the renderings spread across the table. People already know enough, she said. If I spend my life proving I was hurt, I will still be living inside their story. I want to build mine. So she worked. Ashford Living expanded its riverfront team. It hired local project managers. It partnered with training programs. It accepted interviews only when the questions centered on design, community, and restoration. Naraya walked job sites with Orlan, reviewed contracts with Priya, corrected cost models with Reeves, and pushed Talia to trust her eye. Her peace did not come from forgetting. It came from refusing to let betrayal become the center of her future. Months later, Dorian and Naraya stood on opposite sides of another decision. This time, the project was national. A historic railway terminal in Philadelphia needed restoration. The building stretched across several blocks, with arched windows, stone columns, old tracks, and a clock tower that had stopped years earlier. City leaders wanted it transformed into a public market, art space, boutique hotel, and small business district without erasing its history. The project drew attention from firms across the country. By the final round, only two proposals remained. Whitlock Crown, Ashford Living. The press loved the tension. Business programs called it the most personal corporate contest of the year. Headlines paired Dorian and Naraya's names as if their past were more important than the building itself. Some expected revenge. Others expected Dorian to fight harder after losing the riverfront project. Naraya ignored the noise. Her proposal focused on public access, local vendors, preservation, and space for artists. Dorian's proposal brought hotel experience, financing strength, and national operations. Both plans had value. Both had gaps. During the review, the judges asked each team hard questions. Whitlock Crown had the stronger hotel model, but weaker community programming. Ashford Living had the stronger public design, but less experience managing a large hospitality section. After hours of discussion, the panel chair made a suggestion no one expected. A joint bid would serve this project best. The room reacted at once. Dorian looked toward Naraya. Naraya did not look back immediately. She stared at the building model in the center of the table, studying the terminal's long roofline, the stopped clock, and the old waiting hall that deserved more than another battle between two wounded people. The judges wanted partnership. The world expected refusal. Naraya needed truth before any answer. Naraya asked to speak with Dorian privately, but she chose a glass-walled conference room where both teams could still see them. No closed doors, no hidden corners, no old patterns. Dorian understood the message and accepted it. Naraya stood across from him with her arms folded. I will not become your redemption story. I know. I will not let the press turn my work into a soft ending for what you did. I know. And I will not enter any partnership where my name is used for trust while your company keeps the real control. Dorian nodded once. That is fair. She studied him, searching for the old defensiveness, the pride, the need to correct her tone before hearing her words. He did none of that. He opened the folder in front of him and turned the draft agreement toward her. Equal partnership, he said. Shared authority over design, budget priorities, vendor selection, preservation decisions, and public commitments. Your team leads community integration. Mine leads hotel operations. Any major change requires both signatures. Naraya looked at the document, but she did not touch it yet. Equal on paper is easy, she said. Dorian met her eyes. Equal in every room. The words entered the space between them, simple and steady. Naraya remembered the boardrooms where her ideas had worn his name. She remembered dinners where her mind had been needed but not honored. She remembered the ballroom where his silence had taught her the cost of trusting the wrong promise. What changed? She asked. Dorian's voice lowered. I learned that love without respect becomes possession. I do not want to possess you, Naraya. I want to stand beside you correctly, even if you never stand beside me again. For a long moment, she said nothing. At last, she picked up the agreement. I will review it with Priya, she said. Dorian nodded. Of course. That answer mattered. He did not rush her. He did not pressure her. He did not ask for trust he had not earned. And for the first time, Naraya allowed herself to believe that respect had returned before love asked for another chance. The joint project was not approved because the city loved a romantic story. It was approved because the work proved itself. For weeks, Naraya and Dorian's team sat across from the review panel with revised plans, cost reports, preservation notes, public access commitments, hotel operation documents, vendor protections, and community impact reports. The judges asked hard questions. They tested every promise. They looked for weak points in the partnership because everyone knew the history between the two names on the proposal. Naraya answered with facts. Dorian answered without taking over. That mattered. When a judge asked about community ownership, Dorian turned the floor to Naraya before anyone prompted him. When another judge asked about hotel logistics, Naraya let Dorian lead, without trying to prove she knew everything. For the first time, their strengths did not fight for the same seat. They worked like two people who had learned the cost of pride. On the final day, the panel chair looked over the documents, removed her glasses, and said the railway terminal needed more than a developer. It needed trust, money, memory, hospitality, and discipline. No single company had offered all of it alone. Together, Whitlock Crown and Ashford Living had. The announcement came at noon. Their joint bid had won. No one cheered at first. Naraya sat still, taking in the words with a calm face and a heart moving faster than she wanted anyone to see. Across from her, Dorian looked down at the table. He did not smile like a man who had won control. He looked humbled, as if he understood the victory belonged to something larger than him. Reporters rushed outside. Cameras waited. The world wanted a headline about exes turned partners. Naraya wanted the building to live again. Dorian looked at her, not at the cameras. "You led us here," he said. Naraya held his gaze. "No," she replied. "We earned it here." The railway terminal had been closed for nearly 20 years. Once, it had carried families, workers, soldiers, students, travelers, and dreamers across the country. People had said goodbye beneath its clock. Couples had met at its platforms. Children had slept on benches beside tired parents. Vendors had sold coffee, newspapers, flowers, and warm bread near the main hall. By the time Naraya first walked through it, dust covered the ticket windows. Rust marked the railings. Old signs hung crooked near the platforms. Pigeons nested near the roof beams. The great clock above the entrance had stopped at 6:17, as if time itself had refused to move until someone cared enough to return. Naraya stood beneath that clock for a long time. Dorian watched from several feet away. Years ago, he would have asked what the property could become in terms of profit. This time, he waited for what she saw. "This place was never empty," she said at last. "It was waiting for people to remember what it held. So they restored it with patience." The central hall became a public market filled with local food stalls, flower sellers, small bakeries, book vendors, and family-owned shops. One wing became an art space where young painters, sculptors, and community groups used restored rooms without paying prices meant only for the wealthy. The upper floors became a boutique hotel, but not one that shut the city out. Guests entered through one side, while the public market kept the heart of the terminal open. The old platforms became walking paths. The clock was repaired. The stone columns were cleaned, not replaced. The worn rail lines remained visible under glass in one section, so visitors remembered what the building once carried. Naraya fought for every detail. Dorian funded, defended, and listened. For once, beauty did not erase history. It served it. Dorian's change did not arrive as one grand speech. It arrived through repeated choices when no camera waited. He credited Naraya in every public meeting. Not vaguely, not with polished phrases meant to sound generous. He said her name beside specific ideas. He told hotel executives the public market layout came from her study of local foot traffic. He told investors the vendor protection model came from Ashford Living. He told the press the project would have been weaker without her leadership. At first, people looked surprised. Dorian let them be surprised. He no longer softened the truth to protect his old pride. In private, he changed too. When Naraya disagreed, he did not punish her with distance. When she corrected a design choice, he asked why. When old habits rose in him, he admitted it before they grew into harm. One evening, they stayed late at the terminal after a long budget meeting. Naraya stood near a table covered in revised drawings. Dorian entered quietly and placed a cup of tea beside her. She looked up. "You remembered." "I should have remembered more," he said. She did not answer. He did not fill the silence. That was another change. The old Dorian rushed to explain. The new one let truth stand, even when it made him uncomfortable. Some days, Naraya trusted him a little more. Other days, old pain rose without warning. A boardroom tone, a delayed reply, a woman laughing too close at an industry dinner. Each moment reminded her that healing was not a straight path. Dorian never asked her to move faster. Brennan noticed from a distance and said nothing, unless Naraya asked. Priya watched the contracts. Orlan watched Dorian. Talia watched Naraya smile again in small, careful ways. Change, Naraya learned, was not proved by apology. It was proved by who a person became after the apology had stopped being new. Opening night arrived with soft music, warm lights, and a crowd large enough to fill every restored corner of the terminal. The clock worked again. At exactly 7, its hands moved above the main hall as guests entered beneath repaired arches. Local vendors served food from polished stalls. Artists stood proudly near their work. Children ran across the wide floor, while parents called after them with laughter. Former railway workers stood near the old platform display, pointing out memories to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. The building had become what Naraya promised: useful, beautiful, alive. Dorian stood near the edge of the main hall. watching her speak with a group of shop owners. She wore a deep emerald dress, simple earrings, and her hair pinned back with quiet grace. People approached her with gratitude, not because she carried a famous man's name, but because her work had touched their lives. Odessa stood across the room, silent, holding a glass she had barely touched. For once, people praised Naraya openly in front of her. They thanked her. They asked for her advice. They treated her as the reason the room felt whole. Dorian did not move to claim space beside Naraya. He waited. Later, when the speeches ended and the crowd spread through the market, Naraya found him beneath the repaired clock. For a moment, they stood without speaking. The past stood with them too. The ballroom, the accusation, Celeste. The silence, the small office, the first win, the apology, the long road back to respect. Dorian looked at Naraya's hand. He reached slowly. Halfway there, he stopped. His fingers remained open, asking nothing, taking nothing. Naraya saw the pause. That pause told her more than another apology would have. The man who once took her loyalty for granted had finally learned permission. Naraya looked at his waiting hand. For a moment, she was not in the restored terminal. She was back in the ballroom, standing alone while cameras turned her pain into a story. She was back in the penthouse, reading headlines that stole her name. She was back in her small office, writing proof on a whiteboard, while the world called her finished. She remembered every wound. She also remembered every step after it. Dorian had cleared her name when silence would have protected him. He had exposed the company's failure when pride begged him to hide. He had stood against Odessa. He had ended Celeste's access. He had credited Naraya's ideas in rooms where he once used them without her name. He had waited when waiting cost him comfort. That did not erase the harm, but it changed the future. Love did not return like a storm. It returned like trust being rebuilt, stone by stone. It returned in meetings where he listened, in public moments where he honored her, in private rooms where he told the truth without forcing forgiveness, in his willingness to stand near her without trying to own the space around her. Naraya had once leaned on a promise that failed her. Now she stood on her own strength. So when she placed her hand in Dorian's, it was not surrender. It was choice. His fingers closed gently around hers. No cameras captured the first second. No announcement marked it. No grand kiss told the crowd what had changed between them. The moment stayed quiet because it belonged to them. Dorian looked at her with tears he did not hide. "Thank you," he whispered. Naraya's voice stayed soft. "Do not thank me. Keep becoming worthy of the hand you are holding." He nodded, and for the first time, she believed he understood. By the end of the night, Naraya stood beside Dorian in the center of the terminal, not behind him, not slightly to the side as decoration, not quiet, so his power looked larger. Beside him, reporters asked for photos, and Dorian stepped back first, giving her the center without making a performance of it. Naraya noticed. So did Odessa. So did Brennan, who raised a glass from the back of the room with a small smile. There was no bitterness in him, only respect for a woman who had chosen her own path. Celeste watched the opening later from a smaller apartment far from the cameras she once chased. Her name no longer opened doors at Whitlock Crown. Her beauty remained, but without borrowed power, it no longer controlled the room. Odessa left early, still proud, but quieter than before. The city stayed. People filled the market, the art rooms, the hotel lobby, the platform walkways, and the benches beneath the clock. They did not come to praise a billionaire's redemption. They came because Naraya had built what she promised. A place where people felt welcome, a place where history stayed visible, a place where dignity had not been priced out. Dorian once preferred Celeste because she praised the man he pretended to be. Naraya had loved him enough to challenge the man he was. He had mistaken comfort for love and honesty for pressure. That mistake cost him his marriage, his peace, and the woman who had once stood beside him without asking for applause. But losing her forced him to see her. Losing him forced Naraya to find herself. The world once called her disgraced. Now they called her brilliant. And as she stood beneath the restored clock, hand in hand with the man who had learned respect too late, Naraya understood the lesson pain had taught her. Love should never require a woman to disappear. He lost a quiet wife, because he wanted a woman who praised his power. But when that quiet wife became his greatest rival, he finally understood the truth. The woman he failed to protect was the only one strong enough to build beside him.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing stories that ask more of you. The next story will be waiting.